Bedtime Reading. Madame Bovary. Part 1. Chapter 1. This story takes place in the early 1800s in the French countryside. The book was originally in French, but was translated into English. Gustave Flaubert, the author, was sickened with the French middle class he was born into. He believed the French middle class to be lazy, unconcerned, and selfish. Madame Bovary is about a self-centered, envious, and dramatic middle-class French woman. Flaubert decided that to write about something he so sincerely hated would show his true creative writing ability. Although he was sickened with the French middle class, he forced himself to show people talking, thinking, and acting as people do talk, think, and act. He spent over 5 years writing this book. At times, he would spend 1 week writing and rewriting 2 pages of the novel. He took great care in writing his novel, more care than any novelist before him. The main character is a woman called Madame Emma Bovary. She is unsatisfied with her life and bored with reality. She is married to a country doctor named Charles Bovary. The students were sitting down in their seats, waiting to begin class when the headmaster came in, followed by a new boy, not dressed in the traditional school uniform. Those who were asleep woke up, and everyone stood up to greet the headmaster.
"Here is a boy for you, Monsieur Roger,"
the headmaster said in a quiet voice.
"I'm putting him in the 2nd grade to start. But if he improves in his studies, he can go up higher, where he should be at his age."
The new boy sat nervously in the corner of the room behind the door. He looked like a country boy of about 15 years old, taller than all the students, wearing a jacket that was far too small. Monsieur Roger soon began class. The new boy listened to the lesson carefully. He did not move once during the lesson. When class was over, the master had to tell him that he could go along with the rest of the class. The next day, the country boy returned again. He sat again in the corner with his cap sitting on his lap, listening respectfully to the master.
"Stand up,"
said the master. He stood up, his cap fell down, and the students laughed. He bent down to pick up his cap. Another student knocked it out of his hand. Again he picked it up. The other students always put their caps in the back of the room at the beginning of class, which the new country boy had not noticed.
"Put your cap away quickly,"
said the master, annoyed. The laughter from the class made the poor boy so uncomfortable that he didn't know whether to keep his cap in his hand or put it on the floor or on his head. He sat down and put it back on his knees.
"Stand up and tell me your name."
The boy nervously said his name, but he spoke so quietly that no one could understand.
"Again,"
the master said. This time the country boy opened his mouth widely and spoke with great courage the word Charles Bovary. The class began laughing loudly. Soon the master quieted the students and found out the country boy's name, Charles Bovary. The master then demanded that the boy sit next to his own desk.
"Now you will be quiet,"
he shouted at the country boy. Then, more gently, he said,
"You shall have your cap back. It hasn't been stolen."
In the evening, when the students would study the lessons, Charles Bovary carefully worked on his lessons, looking up every word in the dictionary. His level in school was well below most children his age. He had only studied with the local priest in his village. His parents delayed sending him to school as long as possible because of the great expense of his education. His father, Monsieur Charles Denis Bartholomew Bovary, was previously a major in the military, but was forced to leave. The handsome, charming man soon met a young woman who fell in love with him immediately. She had a fortune of 2,500 pounds, so he was satisfied and married her quickly. Once he was married, he lived on his wife's money for 2 or 3 years, dining well and waking late, never coming home at night until the theatre closed, and almost living in the pubs. He refused to work. His father-in-law died and left the family no fortune. Monsieur Bovary was shocked and angry. He soon began working in business. He lost some money and left for the countryside to attempt farming, although he knew nothing of farming. He lost money at this, as well, because he rode his horses instead of using them for farming, drank his wine instead of selling it, ate his finest hens instead of selling them for meat. He soon realized that he would never make money. At the age of 45, he moved to a village between Caux and Picardy. He made a home in a place not quite a farm and not quite a house. He envied the world and hated his life. He decided to attempt to live a quiet life. He often paid no attention to his poor wife, although she loved him dearly. It seemed the more she gave him, the less he loved her. When they married, she was quite friendly and cheerful, but her character had changed with time. She suffered so much at first when they married, while he chased after other women and paid her no attention, but she did not complain. With age, however, her husband's behavior upset her, and she became angry at her life and her husband. Though, till her death, she never spoke a word about her displeasure. While her husband sat by the fire smoking, she paid the bills and visited the neighbors. The only time he would speak to her was to say something disagreeable or complain about her. A baby came, and his mother gave him everything he desired. His father paid little attention to the poor boy. He would let the boy run around the house with no clothes on. He thought this would help his child grow up strong and independent. He sent the child to bed without a fire to warm him in the winter. He forced the boy to drink liquor and to laugh at church marches. The child, although, was quite peaceful and did not respond to his father's demands. His mother kept him nearby at all times. She told him stories and made him small toys cut out of cardboard. She dreamed that he would grow up to be a handsome, intelligent man. She taught him to read and to sing while she played the piano. Monsieur Bovary, however, thought music was a waste of time. How would they be able to pay for his education? Certainly not through teaching him how to sing, he told his wife. Madame Bovary did not speak, and the boy ran wild in the village. The young boy followed the farmers to the fields, scaring away the birds as he ran. But at the age of 12, his mother was delighted when the local priest agreed to teach the boy. The lessons were quite short, however, and did not teach the boy too much. The lessons were given when the priest had spare moments between a wedding and a burial. He would call for the boy, and then they would go up to the priest's room. It was an airless room. The boy fell asleep. Then the old man would soon grow tired and fall asleep as well. Other times the priest would see the boy running through the fields and call him to the church for a short lesson before a passing friend or the rain interrupted the priest. But he was always pleased with the young boy, and even said he had a good memory. Time went by, and the mother and father realized the boy must attend formal schooling. Finally, Charles was put into school in Rouen. About the end of October, his father took him to the school. He was a shy, respectful boy. He played during playtime and worked in school time. He paid attention in class, slept well in the dormitory, and ate well in the dining hall. Every Thursday evening he wrote a long letter to his mother. On school walks he talked to the servant, who came from the country also. He studied carefully, but was always in the middle of the class. At the end of his 3rd year, he was taken away from the school to study medicine. His mother found a room for him in Paris and arranged for him to move. She found some furniture, 2 chairs, a table, a stove, and some firewood to keep her poor child warm, and a bed sent from home. The boy was shocked to see the great number of classes he would have to take. He didn't understand a word of it. He listened carefully, but could not understand. Nonetheless, he worked, attended all the classes, and never missed a day at the hospital. To save money, his mother sent him a piece of meat every week. He would lunch on this when he returned from the hospital in the morning. Afterwards, he had to hurry to his lessons or to the hospital. At night, he would return to eat a small meal with his landlord before he would return to his room to study. On summer evenings, he would open his window to look in the direction of Rouen. He missed the country air smell. How good it would be there now! He became quite thin and had no passion for anything. One day, however, he did not go to the hospital. The next day, he did not attend his classes. He enjoyed doing nothing. He soon left his studies entirely. He went to the pubs, experienced forbidden pleasures, learned songs and dances, and made love, forgetting all his earlier worries. Choosing the pubs instead of classes, he failed to receive his diploma, and he was expected home on the very night of the examination to celebrate his success. He returned home and told his mother everything. She did not blame him, but blamed the examiners for his failure, and did not tell his father the terrible news. 5 years later, however, Monsieur Bovary found out the truth, but was not concerned with the matter at that time. He could not believe that his own son could be a fool. Charles again began his studies and passed the exams. What a proud day it was for his mother! Now, where should he go to practice medicine? To Tosties. The only doctor there was an old man, and now Charles would become the new town doctor. It was not enough, however. She decided he must have a wife as well. She found him one, a wealthy woman, 45 years old, whose husband had just died, with 50 pounds of income. Although his new wife, Madame Heloise Dubuc, was quite ugly, there were many other men wanting to marry her, given her great fortune. Madame Bovary knew this well, and cleverly found ways to attract Madame Dubuc to her son. Charles believed that marriage would give him freedom. He could do what he wanted with his money. But his wife was master. She opened his letters, listened when he had female patients, and decided what he should wear. She was always complaining about her health. Every night when he returned, she would tell him about her miserable life. She often told him that he paid her no attention, or that he was in love with another woman. Chapter 2. About 11 o'clock one night, they were awakened by a horse arriving outside. The man requested that the doctor immediately go to a farm called Les Bertaux to fix a broken leg. Now, from Tosties to Les Bertaux is an 18-mile journey. It was a dark night, and Madame Bovary was afraid of accidents. So they decided that Charles would leave in 3 hours, at the moonrise. At about 4 in the morning, Charles left for Les Bertaux. He was sleepy and fell asleep while riding, but awoke when he thought of the broken leg. Soon enough, he arrived at the gate, where a boy met him to lead him to the house.
"Are you the doctor?"
the child asked, and when Charles said he was, the boy picked up his wooden shoes and started running along in front of him, to lead the doctor to the patient. Charles spoke with the boy along the way about Monsieur Rouault, the farmer with the broken leg. Charles realized from what the boy said that Monsieur Rouault was a wealthy farmer. He had broken his leg the night before, coming home from a neighbor's. Madame Rouault had died 2 years ago. There was no one else but the young lady. It looked like a good farm. You could see great horses feeding peacefully. Nearby were chickens, turkeys, and about 6 peacocks, the pride of the farm. A flock of ducks was settled happily next to the pond. A young woman appeared in the doorway to welcome Monsieur Bovary into the kitchen. A fire warmed the room in the kitchen fireplace. Breakfast was cooking in several little pots. Charles went upstairs to see the patient. He found him in bed, sweating under his clothes. Beside him was a bottle of brandy, which he had been drinking during the night to take away his pain. The broken leg was a simple one. Charles was thankful. Remembering his teacher's manner of comforting their patients, he calmed the injured man with a few jokes. The maid tore up some sheets for bandages, and Mademoiselle Emma tried to sew some pads, but made her father angry when she took so long to look for her needles and thread. She made no answer, but pierced her finger as she sewed, then put her finger gently in her mouth. Charles watched her. Charles was astonished at the whiteness of her nails. They were shiny and clean. Yet her hands were not beautiful, not pale enough, perhaps. Her beauty was in her eyes. Brown eyes, but they looked black. The bandaging finished, the patient invited the doctor to have a meal before leaving. Charles went down into the living room. Charles dined with Mademoiselle Emma. First they discussed the patient, then the weather, and the animals that wandered the countryside at night. It wasn't very exciting for Mademoiselle Rouault, living in the country, especially now that she had to take care of the farm. Her hair was smooth and black, tied back, leaving only the tips of her ears to be seen. Her cheeks were like rosy apples, and her lips full, which she had the habit of biting at times. Charles went up to say goodbye to her father. He came down into the living room. As she was looking out the window, she turned around. "Are you looking for anything?" she asked.
"My horse-riding whip, if you please,"
he answered. It had fallen behind a chair. Mademoiselle Emma saw it and reached for it. Charles went to help her and stretched out his arm, and felt his chest touch the girl's back. She got up with a look of embarrassment and gave him the whip. He promised he would return 3 days later, but he returned to Les Bertaux the very next day, and twice a week after that, and some unexpected casual visits. The patient recovered quickly, and after 46 days, Rouault was attempting to walk unassisted. Rouault said he couldn't have been treated better. When Charles first went to Les Bertaux, his wife, of course, asked about the patient. Soon, however, she was told that Monsieur Rouault had a daughter, after which Madame Bovary started asking many questions about the young woman. She discovered that Mademoiselle Rouault was well educated, an expert at dancing, drawing, sewing, and the piano. It was too much. "So that's why he smiles when he goes to see her," Madame Bovary said to herself, "and wears his new suit." Madame Bovary hated her. She asked Charles many questions about the Rouaults. Why did he continue to go to Les Bertaux, now that Monsieur Rouault was better, and the bills still unpaid? Why? Because there was a certain person there who could talk and be clever. That was what he wanted. Young ladies from the town. After crying for quite some time, Madame Bovary made her husband promise he would never return to Les Bertaux. He promised, but decided that since he was forbidden to see Mademoiselle Emma, he must love her now. Soon after, it became known that Madame Bovary had lied about her great fortune. What little fortune she had, her lawyer had recently run off with. True, Heloise still owned her house and other investments, but she had many unpaid debts. So the good lady had lied. Charles's parents immediately came to Tosties. There were explanations, Heloise cried. Charles tried to speak for her to his parents. The old people were offended and went. A week later she was putting the washing in the yard when she spat blood and fell. The following day she exclaimed, "Oh, God!" and died. It was incredible. After the funeral, Charles returned home. He went to his bedroom and saw her dress near the bed. She had loved him, after all, he realized as he looked around their room. Chapter 3. One morning, Monsieur Rouault came to pay Charles 75 francs and a turkey. He had heard of Charles's misfortune and came to comfort him.
"I know what it means to lose a wife,"
he said to Charles.
"When I lost my poor wife, I cried and wished I were dead. I nearly went crazy. I couldn't eat. But we mustn't want to die because others have died. It will pass. Come and see us sometime. My daughter thinks of you. She says you've forgotten her."
Charles went to Les Bertaux again. Everything was the same as it had been 5 months ago. Rouault went in and out on his own legs again. Rouault paid close attention to his poor doctor, knowing what pain he was in. Monsieur Rouault started telling stories, and Charles laughed, but then remembered his wife and was sad. Coffee was brought in. He thought no more about his wife. He thought about her less and less as he became used to living by himself, and could visit Les Bertaux whenever he liked. One day, he arrived about 3 o'clock. Everyone was out except Emma, who he found in the kitchen. Emma was sitting near the window sewing. She offered him a drink. They drank curaçao, which was strong, orange-flavored liquor, together. She tipped her head back to drink and then licked the glass, laughing as she did. She sat down again to sew. She did not speak, neither did Charles. Finally, she spoke about her schooling, and he about his time in medical school. She showed him her old music books and spoke of her mother. On his way home that night, Charles remembered the things she had said, trying to remember all of them, to better understand her life. But he could only think of her as when they first met, or when he had just left her now. He wondered what would happen to her. Would she marry? Who would she marry? Her father was rich, and she, so beautiful. His mind kept saying, "Suppose you married, suppose you married." That night, Charles could not sleep. The next morning, he decided he would ask old Rouault. His daughter was of little use to him. She knew nothing of farming. Monsieur Rouault had seen that Charles was often nervous when Emma was present, which meant that he would be proposing marriage to her soon. Rouault thought about the possibility beforehand. He thought Charles was a bit of a weak man, but was well educated and steady. He said to himself,
"If he asks for her, he shall have her."
Charles soon went to spend 3 days at Les Bertaux. he was too afraid to propose the question to Monsieur Rouault. As he was leaving on the third day, Monsieur Rouault came to say good-bye. The moment had come to speak.
Monsieur Rouault, Monsieur Rouault,
Charles said nervously.
there's nothing I'd like better, and I expect the little girl will agree. I must ask her first, however. I'll say good-bye to you and get back home. If it's yes, I'll open the front door.
And he went off. Charles waited half an hour. Then he waited another 19 minutes. Suddenly, he saw the door open. The next morning he returned to Les Bertaux at 9 o'clock. Emma looked embarrassed, but did her work with a little laugh. Her father embraced his future son-in-law. They decided the two would marry next spring, given Madame Bovary's recent death. They thought about the wedding all through the winter. Mademoiselle Rouault used the time to sew her wedding dress. So there was a great wedding party, at which 43 guests were present for 16 hours. Chapter 4. The guests arrived early. All the relatives on both sides had been invited. The ladies wore their best dresses and matching hats with gold watch chains. The boys were dressed like their fathers and looked uncomfortable in their new clothes. Many of them were wearing the first pair of boots they had ever had. The wedding began. The violinist walked first, followed by the bride and groom. Rouault, with a new hat on his head, walked with the groom's mother. Monsieur Bovary Sr. hated such events, as well as the guests present. The wedding dinner had been set. On the table sat several dishes of choice pork sausages, chicken, and buttered vegetables. Bottles of brandy, cider, and wine stood at the corners of the table. Every glass had already been filled to the top with wine. At dessert, the cook brought out the tall, elegant wedding cake, and the guests cried out in surprise. The meal went on through late in the evening. When they got tired of sitting, they went for a walk around the farm, after which they returned to their seats. Towards the end, some of the guests were asleep in their chairs, but the coffee soon arrived to awaken them. Soon the guests left, laughing merrily as they went. The elder Madame Bovary had not spoken a word all day. The bride had not asked her opinion on the wedding dress, or about the wedding dinner. She went to bed early. Instead of following her, her husband stayed awake to smoke cigars till the morning. Next morning, Charles was in perfect happiness. He called Emma,
My wife.
Spoke to her tenderly, kept asking everyone where she was, looked for her everywhere, and frequently took her out into the yard, where he would put his arms around her waist and kiss her gently. 2 days after the wedding, husband and wife left Les Bertaux. Charles had to return to his patients. They said their goodbyes to Monsieur Rouault. There he kissed his daughter for the last time. As he watched the two depart, he remembered his own wedding, his early married life, and his wife's first pregnancy. He had been pretty happy himself that day he took his wife from her father and brought her home. How long ago it was, all that. Monsieur and Madame Bovary arrived at Tosties at about 6 o'clock. The servant greeted them and apologized for not having dinner ready, and suggested that Madame look over her new house. Chapter 5. Emma went upstairs. There was no furniture in the first room. She walked into the second, the bride's room. She noticed a bouquet of flowers sitting in the corner of the room. A bride's bouquet, the first one's. She stared at it. Charles noticed and took it out of the room. Emma sat down in her new room, thinking of her own wedding bouquet packed away in her luggage, and wondering what would happen to it if she were to die. She spent the first few days deciding how to redecorate the house. Her husband was happy with his new life. A meal together and a walk along the road in the evening completed his happiness. In bed in the morning he would watch the sunlight fall on her pale cheeks. As he would leave in the morning, he would blow her a kiss. She waved in answer and shut the window. He left. When, till now, had life been good to him? In his school days? Alone among students who had more money than he or were more clever than he in class. Or later, when he had been studying medicine and never had enough money to take out a young lady. And then, for 14 months, he had lived with the widow who cried all the day and night. But now, this pretty woman he loved was his for life. Before the wedding, she had believed herself in love, but not having found the happiness that results from love, she now believed she was mistaken. And Emma wondered what exactly love meant in life, which had looked so beautiful in books. Chapter 6. When Emma was 13, her father had taken her into Rouen and entered her at the church for schooling. At first she enjoyed the company of the nuns, who entertained her. She played very little at playtime. She knew her lessons well, and it was always she who answered the most difficult questions in class. The religious stories and the pictures alongside charmed her. The songs she learned in the music lessons were all about faith and the religious stories she was told in school. She wept a great deal for a few days when her mother died. She kept a piece of her mother's hair with her to remember. When she wrote letters home to her father, full of sadness, she asked that when she died she would be buried with her mother. Her father thought she must be ill and came to see her. Emma soon grew distant, paying little attention to her lessons. She loved the church for its flowers, music for the song's words, poems for its emotional language, and began to hate hearing the lessons of the church and the rules that went along. When her father took her away, no one missed her when she left. Home once more, Emma at first enjoyed commanding the servants, but she soon grew tired of the country and wanted to return to the church again. At the time of Charles's first appearance at Les Bertaux, Emma was tired of the world. She believed she had nothing more to learn and nothing more to feel. Then she realized that she would get nervous if Charles was around. She believed that, perhaps, she could fall in love with this man, although she knew that the peacefulness of her present life could never be the happiness she dreamed of. Chapter 7. And yet, sometimes it occurred to her that this was the happiest time of her life as a new bride. To fully enjoy her new life and feel entirely content, she must have to be in a land far away, with musical names where wedding nights complete a life of perfect happiness. Of course, such places and feelings can only be imagined in novels. She would have been glad to have someone to discuss her feelings with, but how to describe such feelings that change like the wind? Lacking the words, she had neither the opportunity nor the courage. Charles, however, could never guess her true feelings. As their outward familiarity grew, she inwardly separated herself from him. Charles's conversation bored her, lacking emotion, laughter, and dreams. He had no desire to go to the theatre. He couldn't swim, nor fire a pistol. She thought, however, that a man should know about everything. But this one had nothing to teach, knew nothing, wanted nothing. He thought she was happy, and she hated him for that. Emma knew how to run the house. She requested patients' payments respectfully. When they had one of the neighbors to dinner, she knew how to present the dishes in an elegant fashion. Charles's respect for himself grew, having such a wife to care for him. His mother still came to see him, whenever she and her husband had troubles between them. The elder Madame Bovary seemed, however, to rather dislike her daughter-in-law, who wasted their money and spent her days dreaming. In the days before Charles's first wife died, his mother felt that she was still his favorite. But now she saw that as Charles fell in love with Emma, he seemed to love his mother less. Charles didn't know what to say. He respected his mother, and he was completely in love with his wife. Although Emma knew she was not in love, she tried to make herself fall in love. In the moonlight, she used to read him love poems, or sing the most romantic love songs she knew. She still felt nothing, and Charles seemed neither more emotional nor more loving. Soon enough, Charles's sweet touches and tender kisses seemed nothing more than a routine. It was just one more habit he enjoyed. A patient of his had given the doctor's wife a young dog, which she often took for walks. One afternoon, sitting on the grass, Emma said to herself, "Oh God, why did I get married?" She wondered if she would have met some other man. They weren't all like this one. Perhaps he would be handsome and intelligent. But no, life for her was cold and silent. She called Jolly and took the dog between her knees. "Come, kiss mistress. You haven't got any troubles." The dog looked at her. She felt touched and spoke to it aloud. Towards the end of September, they received an invitation to La Vaubyessard, the home of the Marquis de Andervilliers, who had quite a high position in politics. A servant was sent to Tosties to pay for an operation, and had noticed the excellent cherry trees in the doctor's little garden. La Vaubyessard's cherry trees were not doing well, and the Marquis sent Bovary a request for a tree, and afterwards came to thank him. He saw Emma and noticed her womanly figure and gentle manners. He then invited the young couple to a dinner at La Vaubyessard. On Wednesday at 3 o'clock, Monsieur and Madame Bovary left for La Vaubyessard. Chapter 8. Dinner was at 7. As Emma went in, she breathed in the smell of fresh flowers, choice meats, and fine chocolates. Iced champagne was served. She had never tasted many of the dishes presented. After dinner, the ladies went upstairs to get ready for the dance. Emma took great care in dressing. As she was fixing her hair, Charles came to kiss her on the shoulder. "Let me alone," she said. She walked down the stairs. Emma was nervous for the dancing, but once she began, her worries left her, and she was soon smiling. Among the dancers, Emma noticed some looking quite more gentlemanly than the rest. Their coats were cut better, their hair looked more fashionable, and they had the appearance of wealth. Emma saw a peasant outside and thought of her past life at Les Bertaux. She remembered herself at the dusty farm with her father. But here she was at a dance, holding a silver glass of wine in her hand. One of the men, called Viscount, asked Madame Bovary to dance. They started slowly and then got faster. He looked down at her, and she looked up at him as they danced. He soon took her back to her seat, where she sat and covered her eyes with her hands. There was a large party at breakfast, but the guests quickly departed. The Bovarys soon left to return to Tosties. Emma sat in silence. Soon a number of horsemen passed by, laughing, with cigars in their mouths. Emma saw the Viscount among them. A mile further, the Bovarys had to stop. Charles noticed a cigar case lying on the ground. Emma looked at it carefully, and knew it belonged to the Viscount. When they returned home, dinner was not ready. Madame Bovary was angry and fired the maid immediately. The next day went, oh, so slowly. She could not forget about her exciting adventure at La Vaubyessard. She was changed after seeing so much fortune, and so it gave Emma something to do, to think about the dance. Each time Wednesday arrived, she awoke, saying to herself, "A week ago, 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, I was there." She soon forgot the guests' faces and the music of the dance, but she still desired it all. Chapter 9. Often, when Charles was out, she used to take out the cigar case from where she had hidden it. She opened it, smelled it, and remembered the Viscount. She was at Tosties now. He was far away in Paris. Why Paris? Such a mighty name. She bought a guide to Paris and tracked her way to the capital with her finger. She had thoughts of Paris dancing in her head all day long. Nothing else existed. Her boring countryside life seemed too ordinary for her. Particular bad luck for the unfortunate young woman. A new girl of 14, Félicité, came to replace the maid. Emma taught her how to clean and dress Madame Bovary, and tried to make her a lady's maid. Emma often sat in her room, thinking and dreaming. She longed to travel, or to go back to the church. She wanted to die, and she wanted to live in Paris. Charles looked well and felt well. He was content with his life. His patients appreciated his calm manner and honest billing. Emma, however, was generally getting angrier with him. The way he loudly ate his meals and drank his wine annoyed her, and now he began to gain weight, and his cheeks swelled. Emma used to straighten his shirt or tie. She did this, not because she loved him, as he imagined, but because it was a nervous habit, embarrassed of him. And all the time she was waiting for something to happen in her life, although she did not know what. But every morning when she awoke, she hoped to find it there. Then in the evening, sadder every day, she longed for the next day. Spring came, and with the warmer weather, she often had trouble breathing. As soon as July came, she began counting how many weeks there were till October, thinking that the Marquis de Andervilliers might have another dance at La Vaubyessard. September came and went without a letter or a visit. She was disappointed, and sadness grew in her heart. Other people, however, could at least expect something to happen to them, but for her, nothing. With no one to hear her play, she stopped playing the piano. Sewing and drawing made her upset, so she soon stopped that as well. "I've read everything," she said to herself, so she sat every day watching out the window. The next winter was cold and difficult. On warm days, Emma went out into the garden. No birds sang. Everything seemed asleep. She went upstairs again, locked her door, and sat alone in sadness. She no longer managed the house. When the elder Madame Bovary came for a visit, she was astonished to see how Emma had changed. It became quite difficult to please Emma. Nothing satisfied the girl living in her own sadness. Towards the end of February, her father, Monsieur Rouault, came over with a grand turkey to celebrate his leg, which had recovered fully. He spent 3 days at Tosties, and Emma showed him nothing but disrespect and annoyance. Would this suffering last forever? Why was she so unlucky in life? She cried for envy of the wealthy lives of La Vaubyessard women, filled with dances and pleasure-seeking. She grew pale and became ill. Charles prescribed medicine, which only upset her more. As she was always complaining about Tosties, Charles concluded that the situation was making her ill. He decided that they must move. Although it would be difficult for him to leave Tosties, just as he was becoming familiar with the townspeople after living there 4 years. Yet they must move for his poor wife. He decided on a small town called Yonville-l'Abbaye, whose doctor had left a week ago. When they left Tosties in March, Madame Bovary was pregnant. Part 2, Chapter 1. Yonville was a quiet, small town, 24 miles from Rouen. Until 1835, there was no proper road to Yonville. The town had a church, a small market, a one-room town hall, and a single narrow street, with a few shops on either side. Nothing had changed in Yonville for many years till the Bovarys came. As the Bovarys entered the center of the town, some townspeople appeared in the market square. They all started talking at once, asking for news and explanations. They had been delayed by Madame Bovary's dog, which had run across the fields. They spent some time looking for it, but finally they had to come. Emma had begun to cry and grew angry. She said it was Charles's fault. Chapter 2. Emma got out first, followed by her maid, Félicité. They had to wake Charles up, as he had fallen asleep hours ago. For the first few nights, the Bovarys were to first dine at the Golden Lion Inn, owned by Madame Lefrançois, until their home was ready. Madame Bovary walked to the kitchen fireplace. On the other side of the fireplace was a fair-haired young man, watching her in silence. He was Monsieur Léon Dupuis, who worked as a clerk in Yonville, and often dined at the inn, having nothing else to do in the sleepy town. He turned to Madame Bovary.
"I believe you must be tired, madam."
"That's true," replied Emma. "But I always enjoy traveling."
"It is so depressing,"
sighed the clerk.
"to always be in the same place. If you were like me, always having to visit patients—"
said Charles.
"Surely,"
Léon interrupted, turning again to Madame Bovary.
"nothing could be more pleasant."
The town chemist then walked in to add,
"Medical practice is not too difficult in this town, for the roads are good enough, and in general you're paid pretty well, the farmers being wealthy, although the townspeople still fear modern medicine. They still trust their prayers rather than coming to the doctor or the chemist."
"Are there any good walks in the neighborhood?" asked Madame Bovary to the young clerk.
"Not many,"
he replied.
"There's a place at the top of the hill near the woods. I go there with a book sometimes on Sundays and watch the sunset."
"I don't think there's anything as wonderful as the sunset," she said, "especially by the seaside."
"I love the sea,"
exclaimed Monsieur Léon. "Don't you feel," Madame Bovary continued, "that to just watch the measureless changes of the sea lifts your soul?"
"Mountains are like that too,"
said Léon.
"How the sight must inspire you! I heard about that famous musician who used to play his piano in sight of some incredible scene to inspire him."
"Are you a musician?" she asked.
"No, though I'm very fond of music,"
he answered.
"Don't believe him, Madame Bovary."
Homais, the chemist, interrupted.
"He sings beautifully. I could hear him from my laboratory."
Léon rented a room from the chemist. Léon looked embarrassed at this compliment. Emma continued, "What sorts of music do you like best?"
"Oh, German. It lets you dream,"
Léon responded. "Do you know the Italian opera?"
"Not yet, but I shall go next year when I'm in Paris. As I've explained to your husband,"
said the chemist,
"your home is one of the most comfortable in Yonville. It also has a garden by the river, and if Madame is fond of gardening, she will be able—" "My wife doesn't enjoy that much,"
said Charles.
"She would rather stay in her room all the time reading." "I'm the same,"
remarked Léon.
"What could be better than a book by the fireside?"
"Yes, Yes, she said, looking at him.
You forget everything,
he continued.
You travel in your chair through countries you seem to see. You become the character.
How true, said she.
Have you ever, while reading a book, come upon an idea that you have thought of yourself which expresses your own feelings?
I have felt that, she answered.
Yes, living here, far from the world, books are a distraction. Yonville is quite dull.
Like Tosties, no doubt, Emma answered. I always belonged to a library there. The chemist interrupted.
You must come visit my library any time you would like.
They had been sitting over the meal for 2 hours and a half, while Charles and the chemist spoke about medicine. Emma and Léon discussed everything, Paris shows, names of novels, new dances, and the world they had never known. So they spoke until dinner was over. Late in the evening they departed. The village was asleep. As she stepped inside, Emma smelled the new paint. It was the 4th time she had slept in a strange place. The first was at the church in her youth, the second when she arrived at Tosties, the third at La Vaubyessard, and now this was the 4th. Each had seemed to begin a new stage in her life. She didn't think things could remain the same in different places. And since her life had been unlucky so far, the future must surely be better. Chapter 3. As she was getting up the next morning, she saw the clerk cross the market-place. She was in her night-clothes. He looked up and smiled. She smiled back and quickly shut the window. Léon waited all day for 6 o'clock to arrive. When he got to the inn, he only found Monsieur Binet already at a table. The dinner party the previous night was exciting for Léon. Never before had he spent 2 whole hours talking to a lady. Normally he was quiet, in part because he was shy and another part because he found some others boring to talk with. The people of Yonville considered him a real gentleman. He respected the older people and did not speak about politics and anger, uncommon in a young man. He had many talents as well. He could paint and read music, and read quite often. Monsieur Homais respected him for his education. Madame Homais liked him for his friendliness. He often took the Homais children out to play in the garden, although they were quite spoiled. In addition to the maid, they had Justin to look after them. Justin was a distant cousin of Homais. The boy had no home, so the Homais family took him into theirs. He studied under the chemist and helped with the housework as well. The chemist was an excellent neighbor to the Bovarys. He gave Madame Bovary advice on the town and how to buy cheap butter. The chemist had an important reason for showing his neighbors such respectful attention. Some time ago he came into trouble with the police. He did not have a diploma in medicine, but would sometimes perform medical operations in his laboratory. He was forced to go to court, and the event terrified him. He often had nightmares of going to prison, his family in tears, his beloved shop sold. After several months, this memory was slowly forgotten, and he began again to give medical advice. But the mayor of the town did not approve, and others envied him. He had to be quite careful. His kind behavior toward Monsieur Bovary would require him to keep silent if he ever noticed Monsieur Homais' extra business. And so, every morning, Homais brought him the daily paper, and often came for short visits in the afternoon. Charles was unhappy. The patients were not coming. He sat for long hours in silence, or went into his office for a rest. He had little money after spending so much on repairs at Tosties, on clothes for his wife, then on moving, and now his savings were all spent in a couple of years. Although he was quite worried about money matters, when he would think of his wife's pregnancy, all his worries were forgotten. Husband and wife grew closer during the pregnancy. When he watched her sitting in a chair, he was in perfect happiness. He went over and kissed her, touched her cheek, called her
Little Mummy.
He was delighted in becoming a father. After her first feelings of being astonished, Emma was eager to have a child and to find out what the feeling of being a mother was. But, as they had little money to spend, she was unable to buy clothes and toys for the coming baby. This upset her, and for the baby's first outfit, she had the dressmaker decide without choosing anything herself. So she gave up the exciting pleasure of preparing for a coming child. However, Charles spoke about the child at every meal, and her interest in the coming baby returned. She wanted a son. A man is free, whereas a woman is never able to make her own choices. The baby was born at about 6 o'clock one Sunday morning.
It's a girl,
said Charles. Emma turned away. During her recovery, she spent many hours wondering what to call her daughter. After asking her neighbors for suggestions and remembering every female character of the past books she had read, she remembered hearing the Marquis at La Vaubyessard call a young woman Berthe. After remembering hearing that name, Emma had made her decision. Charles's parents came for the child's birth, although Emma's father, Monsieur Rouault, was unable to come. Monsieur Bovary Sr. stayed in Yonville for a month. The townspeople were impressed with his grand silver cap, which he wore in the mornings when he smoked his pipe in the market-place. As he regularly drank a great deal of brandy, he was constantly sending the maid out to buy a bottle, which Charles would pay for. His daughter-in-law loved having him in Yonville. He had traveled to many places around the world during his days as a military officer. Sometimes, on the stairs or in the garden, he would take her around the waist and call out,
Be careful, Charles.
The elder Madame Bovary worried about her son's happiness. She decided that she and her husband must soon leave, as she did not trust her husband with her son's beautiful wife. One day Emma suddenly desired to see her baby, which was being cared for by a local nurse named Madame Royer during the day. It was midday. As she walked along, Emma began to feel weak. She stopped, wondering whether to return home or to sit down for a moment. At that moment, Monsieur Léon appeared. He walked up and greeted her. Madame Bovary told him she was on the way to see her baby, but was getting tired. She requested him to walk with her. That night, every one in Yonville had heard this disturbing news. If Madame Bovary was known to walk alone with a man other than her husband, her reputation would surely suffer. They arrived and were greeted by a woman holding 2 young children in her arms. "Come in," she said. "Your baby's over there, asleep." Madame Bovary gently picked up her daughter from the floor. Léon watched her attentively as she moved. They left, and Emma once more took Monsieur Léon's arm. She walked quickly for a while, and then slowed down. They returned to Yonville along the river. Along the way, they discussed a dance group that was soon to come to Rouen. "Will you go?" she asked.
"If I can,"
he answered. Did they have nothing more to say to each other? More serious communication was passing between their eyes. When they reached her garden, Madame Bovary opened the little gate, ran up the stairs, and quickly went into the house. Léon walked back to his office. He looked over some papers, then finally picked up his hat and left. He walked up to the top of a nearby hill and sat down, looking up at the sky.
"I'm sick of it,"
he said to himself.
Sick of it.
It was difficult, he thought, to live in this village, with Homais for a friend and few others to talk with, and his master, Monsieur Guillaumin, the town's main lawyer, was too concerned with his business to talk. There was the chemist's wife to talk with, but conversation with her bored him. Who else was there? Binet, a few shopkeepers, the local priest. There was really no one who interested him, aside from one outstanding woman, Emma. He was always thinking of her, but knew they could never be together, and felt that as they spent more time together, they were growing farther apart. At first he had visited her often, in the company of the chemist. Charles seemed to enjoy the visits, and Léon didn't know how to speak to Madame Bovary about his feelings. He was quite frightened that she might not return his feelings of burning love that he truly felt. Chapter 4. During the day, Emma would often sit in an armchair by the window, watching the villagers go by along the street. Twice a day, Léon went past from his office to the Golden Lion Inn for a meal. Emma heard his steps from far away and listened carefully as he walked by the window, always dressed the same, and never turning his head to look in at her. Monsieur Homais arrived during dinner. He asked the doctor about his patients and fees. They then discussed the current news in France or abroad. Sometimes he would comment on the dishes presented, or turn around to the maid with advice on how to prepare a certain dish. At 8 o'clock, Justin came for him to close his shop. Homais would give him a look of annoyance, particularly if Félicité were in the room. He had noticed Justin's strong feelings toward Félicité.
"That boy of mine,"
he said,
"I believe he's in love with your maid."
The next Sunday evening, the Homais had the Bovarys for dinner. After they had finished dinner, the chemist and the doctor played a game together. Léon sat beside Emma, and together they looked at Emma's latest fashion magazine. Often she asked him to read some poetry. Léon spoke in a quiet, slow voice. After their game was over, Charles and Homais were soon asleep in front of the fireplace. Léon read on. Then, soon after, he stopped reading, and they began talking quietly. Monsieur Bovary was not an envious man, and saw nothing strange in a friendship between his wife and another man. On a board fixed outside Emma's window she had flower-pots, and as the clerk also had his little hanging garden, they could look across and watch each other watering their plants. One evening, Léon returned home to find a new rug. He called Madame Homais, Monsieur Homais, Justin, the children, and the cook. Everyone was eager to see his rug. Why should the clerk be receiving presents from the doctor's wife? How strange. They decided that she must be his mistress. He was always talking about her talents and clever conversation. He thought constantly about how to tell her he was in love with her. He would write letters, then throw them away. He would cry for hours. Emma, however, knew she was in love with him. Love, she believed, must come suddenly, like a great storm which takes control of your heart. Chapter 5. It was a snowy Sunday afternoon in February. They had all. Monsieur and Madame Bovary, Homais, and Monsieur Léon, gone together to visit an old factory in the valley, 1.5 miles from Yonville. The chemist brought 2 of his children, and Justin came along to take care of them. The factory was unfinished. The sky could be seen through the roof, as it had many large holes. Homais explained how important the factory was going to be, with the strength of the floor and thickness of the walls. Emma was standing with Homais. She turned around. There stood Charles, looking stupid. Even his face annoyed her. As she watched her husband, Léon came to stand next to her. His face looked soft and loving. The weather was getting quite cool. They turned back towards Yonville. Madame Bovary did not go with Charles to their neighbours that evening. When he had gone and she was alone, she remembered the great differences between her awkward husband and the charming Léon. She said over and over again, "Charming, yes, charming. And in love?" she asked herself. "In love with whom?" "With me!" When Charles came in at midnight, she pretended to be asleep, but then asked about what had happened during the evening as he got into bed.
"Monsieur Léon,"
he said,
"left us early."
She had to smile, and she fell asleep. Her heart was content. The next evening Emma had her dinner in her bedroom, by the fire. She was very satisfied with everything. She heard someone coming upstairs. It was Léon. She quickly picked up her sewing to look busy when he came in. She said nothing, and he remained silent, wondering about her thoughts. "Poor boy," she was thinking.
"Why is she angry with me?"
he was wondering. Later he said that he would have to leave for Rouen for business in a few days. "He is so kind," she thought to herself. She looked up at the clock. Charles was late. She began to worry. Léon liked Monsieur Bovary, but Emma's discontent surprised and worried him. He continued to speak fondly of him, however. Emma said little during their conversation. It was the same on the following days. Her talk, her manner, everything about her was different. She became more interested in her housework and family. She spent more time with her daughter, Berthe, and declared that she loved children. When Charles came home every night, she was sitting near the door waiting for him. She no longer hated taking walks in the garden with her husband. Charles's suggestions were always accepted, even if she disagreed. One evening, Léon was dining at the Bovarys, when he noticed Madame Bovary's new interest in her husband and child. She was quite attentive to her daughter that evening, and was seen leaning over her chair to kiss her husband tenderly.
"I must be crazy,"
Léon said to himself as he watched Madame Bovary's new behavior.
"How shall I attract her?"
She looked so in love with her family, so unreachable, that he stopped pursuing her completely, and gave up all hope of a love between he and Emma. Emma grew thinner, and her cheeks paled. She was so sad and quiet, sweet, but so distant. Other people noticed the change in her behavior as well. Housewives admired her for her talents, the patients for her good manners, and the poor for her kindness. But within her, she was filled with desire, anger, and hatred. She was in love with Léon, and she remained distant from him so he, too, would continue to love her, just as he had. Léon never knew, however, that when he would leave her, she would immediately get up to watch him through the window. She thought the chemist's wife was a lucky woman to be sleeping in the same home with him. She would have been glad if Léon knew she was in love with him, but her fear kept her from telling him. She wondered if she had been too distant. To distract her from thinking of him, she would think about her lack of fortune, the clothes she did not have, or the smallness of her house. To make it more difficult for her, Charles did not know she was suffering. He believed that he made her happy, which greatly upset Emma, and so he became the center of her anger, and all the while she smiled, saying that she was very happy, pretending to be so. She often had thoughts, however, of leaving the town with Léon to begin a new life far away, but she knew she could never leave. Instead, she cried all day. "Why do you not tell your husband?" asked the maid, as she saw Emma crying. "Don't say anything. You'll only worry him." "Ah, yes," Félicité said. "You are quite similar to my friend. She would go off by herself to cry and cry. People have told me that she stopped crying when she got married, however." "But with me," replied Emma, It didn't start till I was married. Chapter 6. One evening in the beginning of April, she was sitting upstairs with little Berthe. She came up to her mother with a smile on her face. "Leave me alone," said Emma, gently pushing the girl away. The little girl soon returned, holding her mother's knees, looking at her with big blue eyes. "Oh, leave me alone, will you?" And she pushed her away again with her elbow. Berthe fell against a drawer and cut her cheek. Madame Bovary picked her up and shouted for the maid when Charles appeared. "Look, dear," said Emma quietly. "She's just fallen and hurt herself playing." Charles told her it was not serious and cared for the girl's wound. Emma refused to go to dinner and stayed upstairs alone to look after her child. After Berthe fell asleep, she no longer worried, and then thought herself a very good mother to have been worried over something so small. As she watched her daughter sleep, she thought to herself, "Strange, what an ugly child she is." As Charles returned late that evening from the chemist's to discuss the health of his child, he found his wife watching their sleeping child.
"It's really nothing to worry about,"
he said, kissing her on her forehead. While at the chemist's, he wished to speak with Léon about an important matter. Léon wondered if he suspected something. At last, after Charles had closed the door, he requested that Léon find out about prices of portraits. While in Rouen, he wanted to give a portrait of himself to his dear wife as a small surprise. Léon was more upset than usual. Léon was tired of loving, but not seeing that love returned. He was bored with Yonville and the people there. He soon decided to leave for Paris. He would become an artist. When the moment came for him to leave, Madame Homais began to cry, as did Justin. Homais did not show his emotion like a man. He had a little time to say goodbye to Monsieur Bovary. As he arrived, Madame Bovary stood up quickly. "I knew you'd come back."
"The doctor's not here?"
he asked. "He's out," she repeated. "He's out." And then there was silence. They looked at each other, thinking the same thought.
"I'd like to kiss Berthe good-bye,"
said Léon. She went for Berthe, quickly returned, and Léon kissed the child gently.
"Good-bye, little one. Good-bye, dear Berthe."
And he handed her back to her mother. "Take her," she said to the maid. They were alone again. Soon he departed.
"Good-bye, then,"
he said. "Yes, good-bye. Go." They looked at each other, and he was gone. As he walked away from the house, he turned around for a final look, and he saw a shadow at the upstairs window.
"Come and shake hands,"
said Homais, with tears in his eyes. Monsieur Léon then left. Homais returned home. Hours after Léon left, Emma opened her window and looked toward Paris. "How far away he'll be already," she thought. Homais came to visit, as usual, at 6:30, during dinner.
"Poor Léon,"
said Charles.
"How will he live in Paris?"
Madame Bovary sighed and was silent for the rest of the meal. Chapter 7. The next day Emma was quite upset. Everything seemed sad and depressing. She had nothing in her life to excite her. She again began to think of La Vaubyessard, with the dance and the happiness she felt at that time. Then she would think of Léon, a taller, more handsome Léon. He was far away, and yet he had not left her. She remembered where he sat, what he said, how he moved. He was gone, her only joy in life, her only happiness. Why did she not tell him she loved him? She wanted to run to him and say, "I am yours." But she could not, and only thought of him. From that time on, she thought of him at every moment, and was upset when thinking of him. Little by little, however, she began to forget about her love for Léon, as time went on without him. She began to feel the lonely sadness of her time at Tosties. To occupy her time, she spent money buying clothes and changing her hairstyle. She sat on the sofa with her new clothes and hair, with a book in her hand. She decided to learn Italian and bought many dictionaries and grammar books. She attempted serious reading, no more romantic love stories. Meanwhile, she didn't look cheerful. Her skin was pale, and she fainted often. Charles worried considerably about his dear wife, and cried often about the worrisome matter. One morning, Emma was looking out her bedroom window, where she often amused herself watching the townspeople. A man came to the door.
"Can I see the doctor? Tell him it's Monsieur Rodolphe Boulanger, of La Huchette."
He was unmarried and quite wealthy, with an income of £600 a year. Charles came into the dining room. Monsieur Boulanger told the doctor his apprentice, a student learning his business, needed treatment, as he was quite ill. The man looked ill indeed, caused by his extreme fear of doctors. Charles began treating the man when he fainted. The doctor called for Emma to help him. Charles was quite anxious.
"It's nothing,"
said Monsieur Boulanger quite calmly. He was quite annoyed with his apprentice's behavior. As he left, he turned to the Bovarys.
"It was a pleasure to meet you."
And he looked at Emma. Then he left 3 francs on the table and left. Emma watched him as he returned home.
"Very nice,"
he said to himself.
"Very nice, this doctor's wife. Pretty teeth, dark eyes. How did that awkward man find her?"
Monsieur Rodolphe was 34 years old, with a cold heart and much experience with women. This woman had attracted him.
"He looks stupid. Of course he bothers her. Poor little thing. She's looking for love. If I tell her I love her, she'll be in love with me immediately. Yes, but how to end the relationship? Oh, I'll have her,"
he shouted. He thought about how to meet her again.
"I'll visit them sometime soon. We'll get friendly. There's an event coming to Yonville soon. She'll be there at the agricultural show."
Chapter 8. The famous show did arrive. From early morning on the great day, the village people stood at their doors, discussing the day. Soon enough, Monsieur Rodolphe found Madame Bovary, and they walked around the event together, she holding his arm. Every now and then he would make a conversational remark, such as,
"What a wonderful day!"
or,
"The wind's strong today."
Madame Bovary spoke little as they walked.
"I'm so fortunate to be with you today,"
he told her. She smiled with embarrassment. Some flowers were growing nearby.
"What pretty flowers,"
he said.
"Beautiful flowers for the girls in love. What would you say if I picked one?"
"Are you in love?" she asked with a little cough.
"Who knows?"
answered Rodolphe. The show was beginning to fill with people. Inside were the animals, their owners standing close by. Meanwhile, Rodolphe and Emma spoke of the boring life of the countryside.
"That's the reason?"
said Rodolphe.
"I've been so unhappy recently."
"You?" she exclaimed in surprise. "I thought you were a very cheerful person."
"Oh, I look very happy, but I am not."
"Oh," "But what about your friends?" she said. "Don't you think of them?"
My friends? What friends? Have I got any? Is there anyone who cares about me? I've missed a lot. If I'd found someone—
"But you're free and rich,"
You're laughing at me.
he exclaimed. She told him she was not. "We poor women have no freedom, no entertainment."
Entertainment never brings happiness.
"Does anything?" she asked.
It comes along one day.
Rodolphe told her.
Suddenly, you meet someone, as if you have seen each other in your dreams.
And he looked at her. Rodolphe had moved closer to Emma and was talking quickly in a low voice.
Doesn't society sicken you? If two people do meet, then everything prevents them being together. They'll attempt it, and no matter what happens, they'll meet again in love, because they were born for each other.
He looked up at her. She was near enough to him to smell the cream on his hair. She remembered the Viscount who had danced with her at La Vaubyessard, that same smell of lemon and vanilla. Just then she looked up to see the Hirondelle coming slowly, the same carriage that Léon so often came to visit her in, and on that same road that he left on, to leave her forever. She suddenly remembered her old desires, and then looked at Rodolphe, sitting next to her.
We? Now? Why did we meet?
He asked her.
Was it not that, like two rivers coming together, nature brings us towards one another?
He took her hand.
I've stayed with you today because I could not leave you. I have never been so charmed with anyone before. But you'll forget me. You know that I'm yours. Only let me look at you.
Rodolphe had stopped speaking. They looked at each other. The show was over. Madame Bovary took Rodolphe's arm, and he took her home. Then he went for a walk, thinking of nothing but Emma. Chapter 9. 6 weeks went by, with no word from Rodolphe. At last, one evening, he appeared. He thought to himself,
If she fell in love with me the first day at the show, she must have been dying to see me again, and she'll be more in love with me than ever now. Very well.
And when he saw Emma turn pale when he entered, he knew he was right. She was alone.
I have been busy,
he said.
I haven't been well.
Nothing serious? She asked quickly.
Well, no, I decided not to come.
Why?
Emma, can't you guess? I think of you every day. I had to come to see you finally, but now I'll leave you. Goodbye. I'll go away, far away, and you'll never hear from me.
Emma had never been told such things before, and she enjoyed hearing it.
Though I didn't come to visit you,
he continued.
I used to get up at night, every night, and come here. I used to watch your house, looking for you. Ah, you did not know I was so near and yet so far.
Oh, you are good, she said, as she cried.
No, I love you, that is all.
They both stood up when Charles came in.
Good evening, Doctor,
said Rodolphe.
Your wife has been telling me about her health.
Charles interrupted.
Yes, I am quite worried indeed.
Rodolphe asked whether riding would improve her health.
Why, of course. Excellent. What do you say, dear?
She said she didn't have a horse. Monsieur Rodolphe offered one of his. She declined. After Rodolphe had left, Charles asked her.
Why don't you accept Monsieur Boulanger's offer?
Said Charles.
It's extremely kind of him.
She told him it might look strange, a woman and a man riding together.
"Who cares what it looks like?"
said Charles.
"Health is more important."
"But I have no riding clothes."
"You'll have one very soon,"
he answered. She decided. When her riding clothes were made, Charles wrote to Monsieur Boulanger to say that his wife would wait for him to go riding at his convenience. The next day at noon, Rodolphe arrived at Charles's door with 2 horses. They rode into the forest. They stopped and dismounted. "I'm tired," she said as they walked.
"A bit farther,"
he answered. Soon after, she stopped again. "Where are we going, then?" she asked. He didn't answer. He looked around. They soon arrived at a field, and he declared his love for her. He was calm and serious. Emma listened, but could not look at him. Then she interrupted him. "No, no," she said. "This cannot be. Don't say any more. Where are the horses? Let's go back." He looked tired and angry. "Where are the horses? Where are the horses?" she repeated. Smiling strangely, he did not speak. "You frighten me. You make me feel ill. Let's go back," she exclaimed.
"If we must return—"
She gave him her arm, and they turned to go.
"What is the matter?"
he said.
"What is it? I don't understand. I can't live without you. I need you, your eyes, your voice, and your thoughts. Oh, be my friend, my sister, my angel."
And he put his arm around her, and they went.
Stay a while,"
said Rodolphe. "It's wrong, wrong," she said. "It's crazy to listen to you."
"Why, Emma, Emma."
"Oh, Rodolphe," she sighed, and then leaned on his shoulder. She hid her face, then gave in to desire. They returned the same way back to Yonville. As they went, they saw the same bushes, grass, and stones as before. Nothing had changed, yet for her, something incredible had happened. Now and then Rodolphe took her hand and kissed it as they went. At dinner, her husband said she looked well, but she did not hear him speak. That night she often thought to herself, "I've a lover, a lover." She remembered the heroines of the books she had read, women that had many lovers. These stories interested her, and now she felt that she was a part of one of those stories. The next day passed delightfully. The lovers met. She told him about her misery, and he interrupted her with kisses. Starting from that day, they wrote to each other regularly every evening. Emma used to place her letters in a secret place in the garden, and he came to receive it and left his own for her, which she thought too short. One morning, when Charles left before the sunrise, she had a desire to see her lover. She decided that she could go there, stay an hour, and then be home before anyone was awake. She left to meet him.
"It's you,
he said.
How did you get here?"
"I love you," she answered. Whenever Charles would leave early, Emma would quickly dress and meet her lover at his home. Afterwards, she would explore the room, opening all his drawers. When they departed, Emma would cry. She wished she could stay with him forever. Something stronger than herself was forcing her to see him. Until one day, when she arrived unexpectedly, Rodolphe looked annoyed. "What's the matter?" she said. "Aren't you well? Speak to me." He told her that her visits were dangerous. Perhaps the neighbors would discover their secret, then her husband. Chapter 10. Little by little, these fears of Rodolphe's became her own fears as well. At first she had thought of nothing but him, and being in love with him. But now she knew she must be careful, or she would lose that love, which she could not bear. On her way back from his house, she looked to the right and left, watched everything moving, every window she passed in the village. She listened for people walking, voices, people working, and sometimes stopped in fear, afraid someone was there. One morning she was returning home like this, when she suddenly saw a rifle pointing at her. A man stood up. It was Captain Binet, hunting for wild ducks.
"Why didn't you shout out?"
he cried.
"When you see a gun, you should always give warning. You're out early."
"Yes," she paused. "I've been to the nurse's to see my baby."
"Oh, very well, very well."
"Goodbye, Monsieur Binet," and she left. Emma knew she should not have left so quickly. The story about the nurse was a terrible excuse. Everyone in Yonville knew that the Bovary child had been back at home for the past year. Besides, no one lived in that direction. The path led only to Rodolphe's house. So Binet would guess where she'd been, and he wouldn't keep the secret. After dinner, Charles, seeing a worried look on her face, suggested a visit to the Homais to cheer her up. The first person she saw in the chemist's shop was Binet.
"Unfavorable weather today, quite humid,"
the chemist began.
"Some people don't seem to mind the hot weather, though,"
replied Monsieur Binet as he looked at Emma. Her heart was beating quickly with fear. "He'll never go," she thought. Madame Homais appeared, with one of her children in her arms. "And how is your little girl?" Madame Homais asked.
"Quiet,"
exclaimed her husband. "Why didn't you bring her with you?" she asked. Emma was watching as Binet checked his bill. At last he left. Emma was relieved. "Why are you breathing so hard?" asked Madame Homais with a worried look. "Ah, it's a bit warm," she answered. Next day, Madame Bovary and her lover discussed how they could meet safely, without others seeing. They decided that Rodolphe would look for a house in Yonville that they could use, where they would be safe. All through the winter, 3 or 4 times every week, he used to arrive in the garden during the night. Emma had removed the key from the gate. Charles thought it had been lost. Rodolphe would gently throw a few stones against the shutters when he would arrive. She would get up immediately, but sometimes she would have to wait. Charles often sat by the fireplace talking. She would get impatient. At last, she began to undress, then picked up a book, and sat there reading very quietly. Eventually, Charles would call out to her from the bedroom.
"Come on, Emma, it's time."
"All right, I'm coming," she answered. He would soon fall asleep, and she would quietly leave, smiling, in her night-clothes. Rodolphe had a large blanket that he would wrap around her, putting his arms around her waist. He would lead her in silence to the end of the garden, to that same garden seat on which Léon used to look at her so lovingly during past summer evenings. She never thought of Léon now. The nights were cold, and they held each other tightly. On rainy nights they would escape to Monsieur Bovary's office. While in Charles's office, Rodolphe would make many jokes about Charles, which upset Emma a bit. She would like Rodolphe to be more serious. Once she thought she heard footsteps outside. "There's someone coming," she said. "Have you got your gun?"
"What for?"
"Why, to defend yourself," Emma replied.
"From your husband? Ha! Poor little man."
She was impressed by his bravery, though she felt that he was sometimes impolite, which shocked her. Rodolphe thought about this matter of holding a gun. If she was serious in that he should take a gun with him, he thought she was being ridiculous. Her husband was never envious, and Rodolphe certainly did not want to quarrel with the respected Monsieur Bovary. Emma was getting quite emotional as their secret relationship continued. She was now asking for a ring, almost like a wedding ring, to promise a lifelong union. She talked of her mother and asked about his. It was 20 years since Rodolphe had lost his, but Emma comforted him as if he had just lost her that morning. Sometimes she would look up at the moon and say, "I am sure that, together up there, both of our mothers are content to see us so in love." But she was so pretty. This love affair was a new experience for him. Emma was quite emotional, something he usually hated, but it delighted him to be the reason for such behavior. He no longer spoke to her with tender words that made her cry tears of joy. The grand romanticism seemed to be fading. She refused to believe it. She became more tender with her lover, and Rodolphe became more disinterested. She didn't know if she regretted starting a secret love affair with him, or rather, that she just didn't love him any longer. She felt embarrassed by her weakness, which made her angry. She went almost in fear, afraid that if she didn't go, he would tell her husband. Yet by appearance they seemed more in love than before. At the end of 6 months, when spring came, they were acting as husband and wife when they were alone together. That was the time of year when Monsieur Rouault would send a turkey to the young family, along with a letter.
My dear children, I hope you are all in good health and that you will enjoy this bird. I've been having trouble at the farm lately. The harvest has taken a lot of time, and I don't know when I shall get over to see you. I can't leave the place now because I am all on my own. My poor Emma. I'm all right myself, except for a cold I caught the other day. I've heard that Bovary has been working hard as ever, but that doesn't surprise me. I'm glad to hear it. My dear ones, I still have not seen my beloved granddaughter, Bertha Bovary, but I hope to see her soon. I've planted a plum tree for her in the garden, underneath your window, and I won't touch it unless it's to take some fruit for her when she comes. Goodbye, my dear children. My love to you, my girl, and you too, son-in-law, and a kiss for the little one on both cheeks. I am, with every good wish, your loving father, Theodore Rouault.
Emma stood a few minutes with the paper in her hands. She was imagining her father sitting near the fireplace, writing the letter she had just received. She remembered summer evenings filled with sunshine, happy days, days full of hope and freedom, days rich with dreams of her future. She had no dreams now. Why was she unhappy now? What had happened in her life to make her so upset? She thought about what had caused her to suffer. She could hear her little girl shouting with laughter. The child was playing in the grass. "Bring her to me," said her mother, rushing out to pick her up in her arms. "Oh, how I love you! How I love you!" She noticed some dirt on the girl's ears, and she asked the maid to prepare a bath. The mother tenderly gave her daughter a wash, changed her clothes and shoes, asked the maid about 101 questions about her, and finally, with more kisses and some crying, gave the girl back to the maid, who was astonished at such tenderness. Rodolphe noticed that she was more upset than usual that night.
Only a mood,
he decided.
She'll feel better soon.
And he did not come for a visit for the next 3 evenings. When he did come again, she acted distant to him. He pretended not to notice her coldness. Then she regretted her strange behavior. She then wondered why she hated Charles so much, and whether it would be better to love him if she could. but there was little about him that she could love, as every movement he made annoyed or embarrassed her. Soon enough, however, she had a reason to take pride in her husband. Chapter 11. The chemist had recently been reading about a wonderful new treatment for foot problems. He thought that if their local doctor could perform the new treatment successfully, Yonville would gain great fame around the country.
"What risk is there?"
he asked Emma.
"Success is practically certain. An end of suffering for the patient, immediate fame for the doctor. Now, why shouldn't your husband perform the operation on poor Hippolyta? I could even write an article in the local newspaper about the operation. Then everyone in Yonville would know about your husband's great skill as a doctor."
Emma thought her husband might indeed be successful. It would be quite exciting to have a successful doctor as her husband, and bring her closer to fame and fortune. Her wish was for something more than love. She made her decision, and she and the chemist soon convinced Charles that he should perform the new operation. He soon went to Rouen to learn Dr. Duval's technique, and he would spend every evening studying the treatment. Meanwhile, Monsieur Homais spoke with Hippolyte, the farm boy, every day, to convince him to agree to the operation.
"You'll feel almost nothing. Remember, this is no concern of mine. I'm only thinking of you."
Homais told the boy that he'd feel better afterwards and would have more success with women. Finally, poor Hippolyte agreed, after everyone in town convinced him that he must have the operation. But the main reason he decided to do the operation was that it wouldn't cost him anything. Bovary would pay all the expenses. The day of the operation arrived. Monsieur Homais had been organizing the event all morning. Charles made a cut, and they heard a sharp snap, and the operation was over. Hippolyte was silent with astonishment, and kissed Bovary's hands over and over.
"Now, calm down,"
said the chemist.
"We must wait for your foot to recover now."
And he went out to announce the result to the people who had been waiting in the yard curiously to find out what would happen. Charles cleaned up Hippolyte's foot and returned home, where Emma was anxiously waiting for him. She kissed him as he arrived. They sat down for dinner. He ate well, satisfied with his work. The evening passed by pleasantly. They talked of the fortune they would soon have, and he was content, his wife forever loving him. She too enjoyed their new affection for each other. She thought about Rodolphe for a moment. Then her thoughts returned to Charles, and she noted that he had good-looking teeth. They were in bed when Monsieur Homais arrived. He ran into their room quickly, holding up a written sheet of paper in his hand. It was from the local newspaper. He had brought it over to show them.
"Read it to us,"
said Bovary. He read,
"One of our finest doctors here in Yonville has recently performed a new surgical operation." "Ah, that's too much,
said Charles.
"Oh, no, it isn't, not a bit of it. Operated on a problematic foot. The patient was Hippolyte Tautain, for 25 years a local farm boy at the Golden Lion Inn. The operation went smoothly. Only a few drops of blood appeared. The patient seemed to feel no pain. He is resting well and in perfect condition. His recovery should be quite speedy indeed. At our next village dance, we may see the patient recovered well enough to be dancing with the townswomen. Science now achieves anything possible. We shall continue to keep our readers informed of this remarkable cure."
5 days later, however, Madame Lefrancois, owner of the Golden Lion Hotel, was running around in fear, screaming, "Help! Help! He's dying! I don't know what to do with him." Charles went over to the Gold Lion immediately. The poor boy was sweating in pain. The doctor took off the machine that had kept the foot from moving. The foot was swollen, hardly recognizable as a foot. Hippolyte had complained of pain before, but they hadn't noticed. Now, they had to admit that he had not been wrong. Hippolyte's foot was freed for a few hours, but soon enough, the doctor and the chemist decided that they must put the machine back in place, tighter than before. After another 3 days, Hippolyte was still in more pain, and the machine was removed again. They were astonished at the sight. The skin had turned a greenish color, with a dark liquid escaping from the skin. This was a serious problem. Hippolyte was losing hope. He lay in bed, complaining of serious pain, sweating under thick blankets. Madame Bovary came to see him and gave him comfort and encouragement. Many people in town came to visit, singing and shouting as they did.
"How are you?"
they asked.
"You should get up, or you will never heal. You don't smell nice either."
The sick-looking color would go farther up his leg each day. It made Bovary feel ill himself. He came to see his patient every hour. Hippolyte looked up at him with terror in his eyes.
"When am I going to get better?"
he asked as he cried tears of pain.
"It's awful. It's awful."
At last, the good doctor called in another. The doctor, 50 years old, had great self-confidence and some fame within the area. He looked at the patient's leg and then quickly declared that he would have to remove the leg. Then he angrily scolded Monsieur Bovary and Monsieur Homais for making such a terrible mistake.
"Treatments from Paris? They should be stopped by the government. They want to be smart, and so they force you to use their treatments. Oh, we are not as clever as they are because we're not in Paris. Straighten a foot. How can you straighten a foot?"
Instead of supporting his friend, Monsieur Bovary, the chemist had said nothing. He was impressed with the new doctor and wanted to be respected. It was a big event in the village, a leg removal by Dr. Canivet. Everybody woke up early that day. The main street was crowded with people. The shops were not doing business. Everyone watched as the doctor arrived. Homais appeared.
"I shall need you,"
the doctor told him.
"Are you ready? Let's go now."
The chemist was embarrassed and admitted that he could not watch the operation or he would be sick.
"You chemists are forever in your labs. Now look at me. Up at 4 every morning, shower in cold water, never sick, and healthy as ever. I eat anything I'm given and never complain. And that's why I'm not weak like you. I can perform an operation just as I cut up a turkey on the dinner table. Of course, you'll say it's habit, just habit."
And with no concern for the patient, Hippolyte, who was sweating with pain, the gentleman began a discussion of how to perform the operation. During this time, Bovary was too frightened to leave his house. He sat in the dining room, waiting for news.
"What a misfortune,"
he thought.
"What a failure."
And yet he had been so careful. If Hippolyte should die, it would be Charles's fault. He did not think he had made a mistake. No one would believe him, however. Other doctors and the townspeople would laugh at him. Hippolyte might even demand money from him. He would be ruined forever, with no other patients. Emma sat opposite, watching him. She was upset that she had believed her husband had great abilities. Charles started moving around the room. "Sit down! You're bothering me!" she said. He sat down. How could she have lied to herself? She was so intelligent. There was silence between them. but every few moments they would hear a loud scream coming from the inn, where the operation was being performed. Bovary turned pale as he heard the screams from poor Hippolyte. Emma continued to think about her situation. She had tried to love him, but could not. Charles then looked at her. Everything annoyed her about him. She regretted marrying such a fool. He looked out the window. Dr. Canivet was walking outside. Homais followed him as they walked to the chemist's shop. He suddenly turned to his wife and tenderly said,
"Kiss me, my dear."
"Leave me alone," she said in anger.
"Why? Why?"
he asked in astonishment.
"You're not yourself. You know I love you. Come to me."
"Stop!" she cried in a terrible voice, and she ran out of the room. Charles fell back into his chair. He was crushed and began to cry. When Rodolphe arrived in the garden that night, he found his mistress waiting for him on the steps. They put their arms around each other, and all their previous anger was gone. Chapter 12. Their love began again. Often Emma used to write to him during the day, ordering Justin to immediately send the letter to Rodolphe. He would come to see her, only to hear her say she was bored. Her husband was evil, and her life was unbearable.
"Well, what can I do about it?"
he would say impatiently. "We could go away and live together, somewhere else."
"You must be crazy."
She often discussed this subject. He would talk of something else. He could not understand how something as simple as love could cause him such problems. Her feelings of love for him grew every day. The more in love she was with Rodolphe, the more she hated Charles. Madame Bovary was always sending poor Félicité to wash clothes, so she could be alone with her lover. All the while, Justin would watch the maid, silently admiring her. It annoyed Félicité, however, to have Justin following her all the time. She was 6 years older than him. Besides, Monsieur Guillaumin's wealthy son, Théodore, was in love with her. "Leave me alone," she would say to him, annoyed. He would then take a pair of Emma's shoes to clean. Her shoes were always quite dirty from her nightly meetings with her lover in the garden. She had several pairs of such shoes, and was always buying a new pair. But Charles did not get upset with her spending habits. Charles soon paid £12 for a wooden leg as a present for Hippolyte, but Hippolyte didn't want to use such a handsome leg, and asked Madame Bovary to get him another, better for working. Poor Hippolyte soon recovered and returned to work. If Charles ever heard him walking along, he would quickly turn so they wouldn't meet. Madame Bovary ordered the leg from Monsieur Leroux, the owner of a local trade shop. He often visited Emma to tell her about new deliveries from Paris, or a new product she would like. Emma was quite pleased in buying such products. For instance, she brought a horse-riding whip for Rodolphe. Monsieur Leroux brought it to her home the following week. The day after that, however, he called with a bill for over £10. Emma was surprised that he wanted her to pay. She had no money at home and could not ask Charles. The Bovarys owed many in town a lot of money, but had none themselves. Leroux returned, demanding that she pay the £10. She did not have £10. He told her he must take back the other goods he had given her. "Take them," said Emma.
"Ah, no, that was just a joke,"
he replied.
"I know. I'll ask the doctor to return the horse-riding whip."
"No, don't do that," she cried.
"I know your secret now,"
Leroux thought. He soon left, and the maid came into her room with a £15 payment from a patient of Charles. 3 days later, Leroux appeared again.
If instead of paying the money, you would like to take—
"Here you are," she said, and placed the money for the bill in his hand. The man was astonished. Emma had given Rodolphe a horse-riding whip as well as many other presents. These presents embarrassed him. Several presents he refused to take, but she began to insist that he accept her gifts. Recently, however, he had to take the gifts, or she would become quite angry, and she was often telling him that he should think of her always. "Do you love me?" she would ask.
"Of course I do."
"A lot?"
"Certainly."
"You've never loved anyone else?"
"You know I have had other women."
he exclaimed with a laugh. Emma cried. "I love you so much. I can't live without you. Tell me you love only me. I am your slave. You are my king," she would proclaim. He listened to these speeches often, and was now bored with them. Emma was like any other mistress. Their love affair was dull, he thought, although he continued with her, enjoying the pleasures of the affair. He treated her as he pleased, and she became more attentive to him. At home, however, Emma no longer cared for polite, ladylike behavior. Her mother-in-law was particularly shocked. She had come for a visit after quarreling with her husband. One evening, the elder Madame Bovary walked into the garden when she saw the young maid standing alone with a man. Mother Bovary was astonished and immediately advised her daughter-in-law. Emma began to laugh when she heard. The elder Madame Bovary became angry. "Get out!" the young woman shouted.
"Emma! Mamma!"
cried Charles. Both women left the room in anger. Mother Bovary would leave immediately unless Emma apologized. Charles begged his wife. "Very well, I'll go," she replied. She walked downstairs, held out her hand to her mother-in-law coldly, before she said, "I apologize, madame." Then she returned to her room, where she cried on her bed like a child. That evening Emma met her lover and told him everything, although included certain lies in the story.
"Be brave. You must be patient,"
her lover told her. "I've been patient for 4 years. I can't stay here any more. Save me. Take me away," she cried. Rodolphe thought she looked beautiful that night.
"But what about your little girl?"
he asked. She thought for a moment. "We'll have to take her along."
"What a woman,"
he thought. He agreed to go away. Madame Bovary soon went to Monsieur Leroux's shop to order a coat, a suitcase, and a traveling bag.
"You're going on a journey?"
he asked. "No, but can you order this quickly? And here," she said, giving him a watch. "I'll give you this watch to pay for the goods, and leave the goods at your place. I'll come here to pick them up." The lovers planned to run away the following month. Rodolphe tried to avoid the subject. He thought that perhaps Emma had forgotten. At the end of a month, he told her they must wait 2 more weeks. Then he said he wasn't feeling well. Then he went on a journey. Then they decided they would leave on the 4th of September, a Monday. Rodolphe came the Saturday evening before they were to leave, earlier than usual. "Is everything ready?" she asked.
"Yes."
"You're sad," said Emma.
"No. Why?"
"Is it because you're going away from all that's important to you? I understand, although I have nothing important. I shall be everything to you. I will care for you. I will love you.
How sweet you are.
It will be good to travel. Then why am I sad? Perhaps because I do not know what the future will hold, or the sadness of leaving. No, it's just that I'm too happy, she said.
There is still time,
he cried.
Think, you may regret leaving.
Never, she declared. We shall be together every day. We shall have no worries or cares. We shall be all alone for always. Speak to me, answer me.
Yes.
At midnight they parted. Till tomorrow, till tomorrow. We will be together forever tomorrow, my love, she said as she tenderly kissed her lover. As he returned home, thinking of his decision, he stopped.
What an idiot I am,
he said.
I can't leave the country and take care of a child? And how expensive children are. No, no, it would have been too stupid, although she was a pretty mistress.
Chapter 13. As soon as he returned home, Rodolphe quickly sat down, with a pen in his hand, to write Emma a goodbye letter.
Be brave, Emma, be brave. I do not want to ruin your life. Have you thought about your decision? No, I think you have not. I shall never forget you. I shall always love you. But one day these feelings would have changed. We would not be in love any longer. I am in pain writing you this letter. I know this letter will upset you, but you must forget me. Why did we have to meet? Why were you so beautiful? But your life will be better without me. If we had gone off somewhere together, we would have had problems all along. I will always remember you, but now I am leaving the country, for I cannot be here to see you in pain. I shall leave immediately, but I do not know where. Be always good and kind. There, I think that's all,
he said to himself.
Oh, and to make sure that she will not come here to look for me. I shall be far away when you read this sad letter. I have decided to leave immediately, so I can never see you again. I shall come back some day, and perhaps we may talk about our past love. Goodbye. Poor little woman,
he thought to himself. The next afternoon, Madame Bovary was in the kitchen when the letter arrived. Rodolphe had sent her a basket of fruit, hiding the letter. Madame looked at the basket in fear. She quickly took the basket into the dining room and emptied the fruit to find the letter. She then ran upstairs to read the letter alone. Some time after she finished the letter, her husband called her to dinner, and down she went to sit with him. She tried to eat, but she could not. They sat in silence at the table.
Monsieur Rodolphe will be going away for some time. He's going away on a journey. Someone told me just now outside the Café Français.
Emma almost began to cry. She looked out the window and saw Rodolphe pass by in a carriage. She screamed and fell to the floor. After thinking for some time, Rodolphe decided he should go away, but had to go through Yonville to reach the road.
Emma, say something. It's me, your Charles, who loves you. Don't you know me? Look, here's your little girl. Give her a kiss.
The child held out her arms. Emma turned away. She got up but fell again. They carried her to her bed. That evening her illness became worse. She had pains in her heart, sometimes in her chest, then in her head. She started vomiting. Charles thought she might have cancer. Poor Charles was also worried about money problems. Chapter 14. Charles now had to care for his dear wife, and could not leave the house to see his patients. The maid now handled the household expenses, which seemed much higher than when Emma handled them. In addition, he had to pay Homais for medical supplies for his wife's illness. During this time, Monsieur Leroux arrived with a bill for the goods Madame Bovary ordered. He brought the coat, 2 suitcases, and the travel bag. He then demanded that Charles pay for the goods. Charles asked Leroux for a loan of 40 pounds, which he would pay in 1 year, and Leroux hurried to his shop to get the money. Charles often wondered how he would pay off such a large debt the following year. Madame's recovery was slow. She now disliked everything and became upset quite easily. Eventually she recovered, and her memories of Rodolphe became distant. She now became interested in helping the poor, and often sewed clothes to give away. She gave more attention to her dear child, and decided she would teach the girl how to read, and although Berthe cried often, she never got angry with her now. "My angel, do you still have a stomach ache?" she would say to the child. The elder Madame Bovary was astonished to see such a change in the young woman, and thought her to be the perfect wife. Besides her mother-in-law, Emma had other visitors from the neighborhood nearly every day. As Madame Bovary's health improved, she became interested in more projects, and by the end of spring the garden looked a disaster, as Madame Bovary was busy planting new flowers. Charles was satisfied with his wife's new behavior, and wanted to spend some time together, as a married couple. He suggested that they go to Rouen to see a play. She refused, but he continued to ask. Finally she agreed, and the next morning they left for Rouen. They stayed at the Red Cross Hotel. Charles went to the theatre immediately to buy the tickets, while Emma bought herself a new hat and gloves. They arrived at the theatre quite early, as the doors were still shut. Chapter 15. Madame Bovary smiled as she entered the opera house. The event reminded her of the dance at La Vaubyessard. Her heart beat quickly as she and her husband walked to their seats. There were old men with peaceful faces, and young gentlemen walking confidently in freshly pressed suits. Madame Bovary admired them from above, sitting in her balcony seat. The lights were turned down, and the music began. She remembered her days as a young girl, filled with the romantic stories and dreams she read in novels. Emma leaned forward in her chair to watch the actors, as they burst out in anger, and then cried tears of love through tender kisses. Emma had recently forgotten such strong emotions. No one had ever loved her with a love like that. Rodolphe had not cried like that on their last evening in the moonlight, when they had said,
"Till tomorrow, till tomorrow. Why is that man being cruel to her?"
asked Bovary. "No, no, no, he's her lover," she answered. Emma explained more, but Charles continued with questions. "Why does it matter?" said Emma. "Be quiet."
"You know, I always like to understand what is happening,"
he whispered. "Quiet, quiet," she said impatiently. As she watched, she fell in love with the main actor. She imagined her life together with that man. She would have visited all the kingdoms of Europe. He would look up at her in a balcony seat as he sang, singing for only her. She longed to run to him, to cry out, "Take me! Carry me away! I am yours forever!" The actors left the stage. The lights were turned on for the intermission. Charles went to fetch some water, but had difficulty walking through the crowds of people. At last Charles returned.
"You'll never guess who I saw as I was returning. Monsieur Léon.
"Léon?"
He's coming up to greet you."
Immediately Léon appeared. He held out his gentleman's hand to her. She had not touched that hand since that spring evening when he had left for Paris. "Oh, good evening. So, you're living in Rouen now," she said nervously.
Yes.
"How long have you been here?" The play had begun again. People were turning around to look at them in anger. They stopped talking. Emma no longer paid attention to the play. Her thoughts were on Léon. Why had they met again? She remembered the evenings at the chemist's home when he would read her poetry. She had forgotten about their little love, so quiet and patient, but now remembered everything. Charles was charmed by the play, but Léon and Emma complained of the heat, and so the three left the opera house. Charles said they were going home in the morning.
"Unless you'd like to stay in Rouen by yourself, my dear,"
he said to his wife.
"you can come home on Sunday."
Emma stayed in Rouen. Part 3. Chapter 1. While Monsieur Léon was studying for his law degree in Paris, the other students regarded him as looking like quite a gentleman. He studied well, did not spend his money on foolish things, as the others sometimes did, and was well liked by his tutors. Many times, when he was reading or sitting under a tree in the evening, he would begin to think of Emma. But, after time, he began to forget her, and finally stopped thinking of her completely. Now, seeing her again at the opera house, after 3 years, his love for her returned. This time he thought he must have her. That evening, after saying good-bye to the Bovarys, he followed them, and saw them walk into the Red Cross Hotel. He then returned home, thinking of a plan to charm Emma. At 5 o'clock the next day, he walked into the hotel, nervous to see Madame Bovary again. Emma looked content to see him, and apologized for having forgotten to tell him where they were staying. He told her he had spent the morning calling at every hotel in town to find her. They talked in her room for some time. He told her he had been bored all the time he was a student. She told him about her worries. She did not tell him she loved another man. He did not tell her he had forgotten her.
"Many times I wrote to you, and then tore up the letter,"
he told her. She turned away to smile.
"I loved you,"
he exclaimed. After a long pause, she said, "I always suspected it." And then they spoke of their past time together in Yonville.
"You don't know how I used to think about you,"
he told her. "Poor Léon," she said, holding out her hand to him. He kissed it gently. They talked late into the evening. He admitted that he had been in love with her since their first meeting. He often thought about the happiness they would have shared if they had met earlier in life. "I have thought of that sometimes," she said.
"What a dream,"
he said quietly.
"Why shouldn't we begin again now?"
"No, my friend," she replied. "I am too old. You're too young. Forget me. Other women will love you. You will love them."
"Not as I love you,"
he cried. "What a child you are! We must be reasonable." Was she speaking the truth when she said those words? Emma did not know herself. Perhaps she did love him. No man had ever looked so handsome as Léon did now. Emma pretended to look at the clock. "How late it is!" He understood her meaning. And this was her last chance with him. She was leaving the next day.
"Leaving?"
exclaimed Léon. "Yes,"
"But I must see you again,"
he said.
"There's something I want to tell you."
What is it?
Something important. Something very serious. You haven't understood me. You're laughing at me. Please, let me see you once more. Just once.
Well, 11 tomorrow in the church.
I shall be there,
he cried. As they stood up, he kissed her slowly on the neck. Oh, you're crazy! You're crazy! She cried as she laughed. Léon stepped back to leave. He stopped at the door and whispered,
Till tomorrow.
That night, Emma wrote him a long letter, explaining why they should not meet the next morning. But when she finished writing, she realized that she didn't know Léon's address. I'll give it to him myself, she said. He'll come. The next morning, Léon awoke quite early.
Too soon, still,
he said after he looked at the clock. It was 9 o'clock. He read through a magazine, went out, smoked a cigar, wandered through the streets, and then decided it was time to go to Notre Dame to meet his dear Emma. He arrived. He looked around for her, but she had not yet come. He soon heard someone arrive. She had come. Emma was pale in the face, walking quickly. Read this, she said, holding out the letter she had written. No, don't! And she took it back. Then she sat down to pray. Léon was annoyed at her behavior. But then he thought she looked quite charming, sitting quietly with her eyes closed. Then he became impatient. Emma was praying for an answer. She could not decide what to do about Léon. She stood up, and the two walked out of the church. Where are we going? Said Emma. He walked without answering her. Oh, Léon, really, I don't know whether I should...
Why not? Love affairs are common in Paris.
And that comment decided her. At about 6 o'clock, Emma arrived at her hotel again. Chapter 2. She had promised Charles she would return that evening. She quickly packed her bags, paid the bill, ordered a carriage, and left. When she arrived home, Félicité was waiting for her. You've got to go to Monsieur Homais immediately, madame. It's something important. She went to the Homais. The family was in the kitchen making jam. Justin was standing quietly as the chemist screamed at him.
Who told you to go up to my cupboard for it?
What is it? What is the matter? Asked Emma.
The matter?
Said the chemist.
We're making jam. We need a pan to cook it in, so I asked for another pan, and he, this foolish boy, took the key to my cupboard in my laboratory. Take a pan from the store, not my laboratory. Do you know what danger you are in? No, you don't know. Well, I do know. Next to the pan you took was next to a blue glass bottle which contains a white powder, and on which I had written the word dangerous. Do you know what it is? Arsenic, a poisonous chemical.
Emma turned to Madame Homais. They told me to come. Oh, yes, it's bad news, Madame Homais began. She couldn't continue. The chemist was screaming at his assistant.
Empty it, clean it, take it back quickly.
Monsieur Homais, said Emma, had you something to tell me?
I had, madame. Your father-in-law is dead.
Monsieur Bovary Sr. died quite suddenly 2 days ago. Out of a careful respect for Emma's feelings, Charles had asked that Monsieur Homais tell Emma the news. Homais had thought of a speech, full of tenderness, to tell Emma that her dear father-in-law had died. But Homais, in his anger, had forgotten his speech. Emma left. The chemist continued to scold Justin. Charles, who had been waiting for Emma to return, walked to her with open arms.
"Ah, my dear,"
he said, with tears in his eyes. "Yes, I know, she said to him. At dinner, Charles said little, unmoving, looking quite depressed.
"I wish I could have seen him again,"
he said with a sigh. She was silent. Eventually, however, she thought she should say something. How old was he?
58.
Ah. Some time later he added,
Poor mother. What will she do now?
Emma said nothing. Charles thought Emma was silent because she was mourning his father's death. He forced himself to say nothing more about it, to avoid upsetting Emma. He soon asked,
Did you enjoy yourself yesterday?
Yes. They finished dinner and continued to sit at the table. She became quite bored with sitting in silence. She looked at her husband. He seemed so weak, pitiable in every way. Would this evening never end? Next day, his mother arrived. She and her son cried many tears, and Emma disappeared, saying she had housework to do. Charles was surprised to feel upset at his father's death. His mother thought of her husband as she cried. She wished to have even the worst days of her marriage again. Emma was thinking that just 2 days ago she was with Léon, away from everyone. The next day, Monsieur Leroux came to the gate. He had come to offer his services in time of sadness.
Very sorry,
he said.
But I must speak with you about the matter we discussed, you know.
He told Charles in a whisper.
Ah, yes, of course.
Charles said, with embarrassment. Monsieur Leroux came to demand that Charles pay back the money he had borrowed from Monsieur Leroux during Madame Bovary's illness. As he was leaving, Leroux congratulated Emma on the money she would receive after Monsieur Bovary Sr.'s death.
Your husband was in quite a terrible situation when you were ill, particularly when those travel bags and suitcases of yours arrived.
He paused to look at her.
Of course, now that you are healthy, he mustn't be worried. He'll have his patients to take care of. It would be a good idea if he gave you the expenses to handle. It'd be quite simple with the power of attorney. You would pay the bills, and he wouldn't be worried with such matters. You and I could handle these little matters ourselves.
Monsieur Leroux suggested with a smile. She didn't understand. He suggested that he order her some fabric for a new dress. He brought the fabric. Then he came back to measure her, and returned again for other reasons. Each time he came, he would casually discuss the conveniences of having the power of attorney, which would give Madame Bovary the right to handle all the bills, leaving her husband to handle his medical affairs. With Leroux's help and suggestions, she examined the power of attorney laws, and soon enough brought her husband the document to be signed. Charles, surprised, asked where the document had come from. From Monsieur Guillaumin, she told him. Monsieur Guillaumin was the main lawyer for Yonville, who Léon worked under while living in Yonville. I don't trust him, though. Perhaps we should discuss this matter with someone else. But there's no one, she added.
Perhaps Léon,
Charles said. Yes, but Emma told her husband that it would be too difficult to discuss it through the post. so she offered to go to Rouen herself.
"How sweet you are,"
Charles said, kissing her on the forehead. The very next morning she left for Rouen to meet Monsieur Léon. She stayed there 3 days. Chapter 3. 3 full, wonderful days they were. They stayed at the Hôtel de Boulogne, behind locked doors, going out in the darkness of the late evening. One night they went to dine on the river. While smiling contentedly at one another in the moonlight, Léon saw a silk ribbon lying on the floor of the boat. The boatman examined it.
"Ah, yes. That belongs to a party I took out the other day. A lively group of ladies and gentlemen they were. One of them in particular, a tall, handsome man, Adolphe, Dudolphe, perhaps Rudolph."
Emma was shocked to hear his name.
"What's the matter, dear?"
said Léon. "Nothing. It's just a bit cold,"
"The ladies were quite fond of him, too,"
added the old boatman. At last, Madame Bovary had to say good-bye to her lover. He would send his letters to Madame Rollet, the nurse. As they parted, Léon wondered why she was so interested in this power of attorney business. Chapter 4. Léon soon stopped seeing his friends and disregarded his work. He waited eagerly for her letters and read and reread them. He wrote to her. He thought about her often, and his longing for her only grew. One Saturday morning he went to Yonville. He arrived at the Bovary home. Charles answered the door and seemed delighted to see young Léon. Madame was upstairs and did not come down to greet him for quite some time. He saw her alone that night. She promised to find a way for them to meet, at least once a week, regularly. Some money would soon be coming to her after her father-in-law's death. Yes, she would find a way. During this time, Madame Bovary had again begun to play piano, although she had stopped playing a few years ago. Charles admired her musical abilities and often listened contentedly to her play.
"Well done. Don't stop."
"No, it's awful. I need some lessons, but—" she paused. "They're too expensive at 20 francs a lesson."
"Yes, they are."
The next day, Charles came home, looking quite happy with himself. He told her he had found a teacher for just 2.5 francs a time, from a famous teacher. She was not interested and didn't play the piano that evening. But whenever Charles was nearby, she would look at her piano and say, "Oh, my poor piano!" Finally, one day, Charles said to her,
"If you'd like to begin lessons, I suppose that would be all right."
Once a week, she would go into Rouen to see her lover, although her poor husband believed she was going for piano lessons. Chapter 5. On Thursday morning, she awoke early, dressed quietly so she wouldn't wake Charles, and left for Rouen. She arrived just as the town was awaking. She turned a corner and recognized her lover's curled hair. Léon continued walking to the hotel. He walked up the stairs. He opened the door. He went in. She followed. All their worries were then forgotten. They were together. They imagined they were in their own home, there to stay for the rest of their lives, forever a young married couple. He was completely in love with her. She was a lady of style, and a married woman, a real mistress. She was the woman in love of all the novels, with her variety of moods, happy and laughing one moment, angry or indifferent the next. Suddenly she took his head in her hands kissed him quickly on the forehead, cried out, "Goodbye," and rushed from the room. As she returned home, she sat crying, calling out, "Léon." Sometimes on her return, she would see an old man with a walking stick along the road. His face was hidden as he walked. When he lifted his head, his face showed a pair of holes where his eyes should be, dried blood on his cheeks. As he followed the carriage, he sang a little song.
When the sun shines warm above, it turns a young woman's thoughts to love.
Often he threw his hat into the carriage, and Emma would scream in fright. She would sit, thinking of her lover, until the journey was over. Charles was always waiting for her at home. At last, Madame would arrive. She would rarely kiss her daughter. She would often go immediately to her room. Justin was sometimes there to take care of her needs, often more attentive than a first-class maid. "All right, that'll do," she would say. She would be upset and anxious the rest of the week, awaiting Thursday, to see her lover again. "You'll leave me," she used to tell him, in a tender voice. "Ah, yes, you'll marry. You'll be like the rest."
"The rest?"
he asked. "Men," she answered, and pushed him away. "You're all evil." One day they were talking, and she told him that she had loved someone before him. "Not like I love you, though," and she swore on her daughter's life that nothing had happened. The young man believed her. When they talked about Paris, she often whispered, "How happy we could be there."
"Aren't we happy?"
the young man asked gently. "Yes, of course," she said. "I'm being silly. Kiss me." To her husband, she was more charming than ever, playing him songs on the piano after dinner. He thought he was the luckiest husband ever. One evening, however, frightened Emma.
"Isn't Mademoiselle l'Empereur your piano teacher?"
"Yes,"
"Well, I've just met her."
Charles said.
"At Madame Lagarde's. I mentioned you to her. She's never heard of you."
Emma almost fainted.
"Maybe there are several Mademoiselle l'Empereurs who teach piano in Rouen,"
said the doctor. "It's possible," she said, "but I've got her receipts." The following Friday, as Charles was putting on his boots, he found a sheet of paper inside. He picked it up and read, "Received for 3 months' lessons, 65 francs. Félicité l'Empereur, teacher of music."
"Why is this in my boot? How strange,"
he thought to himself. "Oh, it must have fallen out of the bill box on the shelf," she answered. One day, Monsieur Leroux saw her coming out of the Hôtel de Boulogne on Léon's arm. She was worried that he would tell others. 3 days later, he walked into her room and closed the door behind him.
"I need some money,"
he said. She declared that she had none to give him. Leroux got angry and reminded her of his patience with her slow payment of bills. He then showed her a list of goods she had not paid for: curtains, carpet, furniture, and several dresses, the total value of which amounted to 80 pounds.
"And if you haven't got any cash,"
he told her,
"you've got some land to sell."
He named a cottage in a town nearby, which old Monsieur Bovary bought quite some time ago. Leroux knew all about it, even the names of the neighbors. He told her that he knew of someone interested in buying the property, and reminded her that she had the power of attorney, and therefore the right to sell the land. Leroux came to see her the following week. He told her that the buyer would pay £160. £80 was immediately given to her. She asked to pay her £80 bill immediately. He persuaded her not to. She looked at the money and thought she could use the money for her meetings with her lover. Then he laughed and showed her 2 new bills, each for £40. She was shocked.
"But if you pay off your bills with me now, you won't have to worry any more."
And he picked up a pen to write across the account.
"Received from Madame Bovary, £160.
Emma was confused. Then Leroux told her he would subtract this £160 from the total amount she owed him. One day Charles found a new bill in the mailbox. He waited patiently for his wife to return. She explained, as she kissed him while sitting on his knees, that there were many expenses for the house. Charles, however, was becoming quite worried about their income and wrote to his mother. She came immediately. She asked to see Leroux's bills and declared that Emma was spending far too much of their income on unnecessary things, such as carpets and curtains. Emma, relaxing in an armchair, calmly replied, "Oh, stop, stop, madame." The elder Madame Bovary continued to scold her, telling her they would all soon be in the poorhouse. Charles promised to soon cancel the power of attorney. "What?" exclaimed Emma. "He has promised me he will," his mother told her.
"Oh, why do you always have to come and make trouble?"
he asked his mother. Charles, for the first time in his life, defended his wife to his mother and told her she should leave, and the next day she went. As she left, she exclaimed, "No, no, you love her more than me, but don't worry. I won't be coming back to make trouble, as you say." The next Thursday, she told Léon of her terrible week with the elder Madame Bovary. She laughed, cried, sang, danced, and acted quite strangely, but he loved her even more. One Thursday night, she did not return to Yonville. Charles was upset. Little Berthe wouldn't go to bed without her mother, and was crying loudly. Finally, at 11 o'clock, Charles left to look for her. At 2 in the morning, he reached Rouen. He wondered if Léon might have seen her. Where did he live? Luckily, Charles remembered the address. No one came to the door.
"Of course,"
he thought to himself.
"She'll have stayed with Mademoiselle l'Empereur, her piano teacher."
He looked up her address in the directory. As he turned into the street, Emma appeared at the other end of it. He threw his arms around her.
"Why didn't you come back?"
he cried. "I wasn't well. I was at Mademoiselle l'Empereur's."
"I was going there now."
"Oh, she just went out. I feel tired. Let's go home," she told him calmly. Chapter 6. One day, after she had left her lover to return home, she walked by the church where she had studied at as a young girl. Ah, those peaceful days! She then remembered the first months of her marriage, her walks in the garden, dancing with the Viscount at La Vaubyessard. Then she thought of Léon, who seemed like a far-away memory. And yet, she told herself, "I love him." No matter, she still wasn't happy, and she never had been. Why was her life so insufficient? Oh, why did she not have someone noble, strong, handsome, and tender to love her? Her life was nothing but lies. She was never satisfied with anything in her life. The loveliest kisses upon her lips only made her wish for more. She no longer worried about money. Love was her only desire. However, one day, a short individual with a bald head came to deliver a bill from Leroux's shop. She could not pay the bill, and told him to return next week. But the following day she again received the bill, which frightened her. She ran to Leroux's shop. He must help her, but he would not. She cried. She even called him her dear Monsieur Leroux. That evening she persuaded Bovary to write to his mother to send money. Her mother-in-law replied that there was no more money to send. She began selling her old gloves and hats, and other things in the house. Then she would pack everything away and forget about it. The house was quite sad-looking now. Tradesmen were now seen leaving with angry faces, and little Berthe was now wearing stockings with holes in them. After dinner, Charles used to walk around the garden alone. Then he took Berthe on his knee and tried to teach her to read. The little girl was not used to learning, and would soon look up at him and start to cry. After a while, the child wanted her mother.
"Call your nanny, dear,"
said Charles.
"You know Mummy doesn't like to be disturbed."
Madame Bovary spent her days and nights reading fantastic novels of romance or horror. As she read, she sometimes screamed out in terror, and Charles came running in. "Oh, go away," she would say. She would often think of her lover. Their meetings were her happiest of times, and they must be splendid. When he couldn't pay for everything himself, she paid, which happened nearly every time. He told her that they could be just as comfortable somewhere else, in a cheaper hotel. She refused. One day she handed him a bag with 6 silver spoons inside, a wedding gift from old Rouault to his daughter, and told him to sell them. Afterwards he decided that his mistress was becoming quite strange, and that perhaps, after all, he should not see her any more, as many people had suggested to him. Léon had promised some time ago not to see Emma again, but could not keep that promise. Now he was sorry he had broken that promise, as she was causing him quite a lot of trouble in town. Besides, he was soon to be the chief clerk. He must give more attention to his work. It bored him when Emma would suddenly begin to cry on his chest. They knew each other too well now. She was as bored with him as he was with her. Emma had discovered that love affairs had all the boredom of marriage. One afternoon she returned home from meeting her lover. When she reached home, Félicité pointed to a piece of paper nearby. A document had been delivered while she was out. She was frightened by the words,
"By order of the law, to Madame Bovary, within 24 hours, 320 pounds must be paid, or all her furniture and possessions will be removed."
What was to be done? 24 hours. She had borrowed so often and had not realized the total amount. She ran to Leroux's shop. "It's a joke, I suppose," she casually said to him as she walked in.
"Did you think I would supply you with goods and money forever?"
he asked her. "Couldn't you—"
"No."
"But let's talk it over," she said as she cried.
"It's too late."
"Please, Monsieur Leroux, just 2 or 3 more days," she asked.
"That's too bad,"
he said as he closed the door behind her. Chapter 7. She was quite brave the next day when the law officers arrived at her home to make the list of goods to be taken away. They looked all through the house, even in Charles's office, and in the attic, where they found her love letters from Rodolphe. At last they went. Félicité came back inside. She had been outside to keep Bovary away. The following day, a Sunday, she left for Rouen to visit all the bankers she knew. They were out of town or away on a journey. She refused to give up. Those bankers she did see all refused to loan her the money. At 2:00, she hurried to Léon's and knocked at his door. Eventually, he appeared. "I've got to talk to you," she said. They went to their secret hotel room. "Léon, I need £300.
You're crazy.
She told him the story. Charles knew nothing of it. Her mother-in-law hated her. Her father couldn't help. But he, Léon, he must find the money for her. "Go on. Go and try. You must. I will love you so." He went away. After an hour, he returned looking serious. He found nothing. "I would soon have it if I were you," she said quietly.
Where from?
"Your office," she said, with a wild look in her eyes. He was frightened, realizing that she seriously wanted him to commit a crime.
Morel is coming back tonight? I think he will give me the money,
he told her. Morel was a friend of his, the son of a wealthy businessman.
I can bring it to you tomorrow.
Emma did not look happy to hear this. Did she guess he was lying? "Don't wait, though, darling, if I'm not here by 3:00. Now I must go. Goodbye." She returned to Yonville. "What will be," she said to herself. And you never knew. Something quite unexpected might happen at any moment. Leroux might even die. At 9:00 the next morning, she was awakened by voices outside. The people were gathered to read a large notice posted. She saw Justin climb up and tear it down. "Madame! Madame!" cried Félicité, running in. The girl nervously handed her a sheet of paper. Emma saw that all her furniture was for sale. They looked at each other in silence. They no longer had any secrets from one another now. "If I were you, madame," Félicité told her, "I'd go to Monsieur Guillaumin." She dressed and left to speak with Monsieur Guillaumin. She arrived and was taken to a large dining room with elegant furniture and colored glass windows. "This is the dining room I should have," she thought to herself. Monsieur Guillaumin walked in, and they greeted each other. "Monsieur," said she, "I want to ask you—"
What? Madam, I am listening.
She then told him about her money troubles. He knew of Leroux's terrible business practices and was not surprised to hear her story. She became more comfortable sitting with him and soon told him more about her problems. Yes, he could understand. But when she asked him for £120, he declared that he was extremely sorry that she did not come to him earlier.
Why didn't you come to me?
He asked. "I don't really know," she said. He then gently raised her hand to kiss it tenderly. He then moved his hand up her arm. She quickly stood up. "I am waiting, sir," she said.
What? What?
He said, confused. "The money."
But, all right, yes.
He moved closer to her.
I love you,
he said, before grabbing her around the waist. "I am to be pitied. I am not to be bought." And she was gone. She stopped in fear as she came near her house. She couldn't go on, but she must. Where else was there? Félicité was waiting at the door. "Well?" "No," said Emma. She thought to herself. Charles would soon return and she would have to explain the story to him. There would be crying, and in the end, after the shock was over, he would forgive her. "Yes," she thought, "he'll forgive me." She soon saw Charles coming. She became frightened and ran from the house. She soon reached Madame Rollet's house, crying as she arrived. Madame Rollet wondered why she had come. Looking around the house, Emma remembered the time she had come with Léon to see her child. Then she remembered his promise. "What time is it?" she asked. "Nearly 3 o'clock. "Ah, thank you, thank you." Léon would come. Perhaps he'd go to her house. She told the nurse to run and fetch him. The nurse took quite a long time to return. At last the nurse returned. "No one has come, and your husband's crying. He keeps calling for you. They are looking for you." Emma said nothing. Then she remembered Rodolphe. He was so kind and generous. She immediately left to go to see him. Chapter 8. "What shall I say? How shall I begin?" she asked herself as she went. As she came near the house, she remembered the feeling of her first love. She went in the same little gate as before. She climbed the staircase and walked to his room, the last one on the left. She opened the door. He was sitting in front of the fire, smoking.
"It's you,"
he said, standing up quickly. "Yes, it's me. Rodolphe, I want some advice." But she could speak no more.
"You haven't changed. You're still so charming."
He tried to explain why he abandoned her. She listened, and perhaps believed him. "I've suffered," she said, looking at him unhappily.
"Life is like that,"
he answered. "Has life been kind to you since we parted?"
"Oh, neither kind nor unkind."
"It might have been better if we'd stayed together."
"Yes, perhaps."
"Do you think so?" she said, walking up to him. "Oh, Rodolphe, I loved you so." And then she took his hand, and they sat for a while, as they did when they first fell in love, although for the past 3 years he had carefully avoided her. Emma continued, "You've got other women. Oh, I understand. I forgive them. You have everything to make a woman love you, but we'll start again. We'll love each other. Look, I'm laughing. I'm happy. Talk to me." She was lovely to see, he thought, as he kissed her cheeks.
"You've been crying,"
he said.
"Why?"
She began to cry in silence.
"Oh, forgive me. You are the only one I care for. I love you, and I shall always love you. Now, tell me, why are you crying?"
he asked her tenderly. "I'm ruined, Rodolphe. You've got to lend me 120 pounds.
But,
he said, confused. "My husband gave all our money to the lawyer to handle. The lawyer disappeared. We had to borrow. The patients didn't pay, and so, trusting in our friendship, I came to you."
So that's why you came?
thought Rodolphe. After a pause, he said calmly,
"I haven't got it, my dear lady."
He was not lying. He had always spent money on elegant furniture, expensive travelling, and presents for his mistresses, that now he had nothing to spare. "You haven't got it. You haven't got it. You never loved me. You're no better than the rest." She then looked around the room. "When people are poor, they don't put silver on their guns or have a stand for liquor in their bedrooms. You love yourself too much. You've got a country house, farms. You go up to Paris. One of these useless things could be turned into money. No, keep them. I don't want them." She stopped for a moment. "And I'd have given you everything, just for a smile, or to hear you say, 'Thank you,'" she told him. "For 2 years you told me you loved only me, and we would be together forever. Our plans for going away. Do you remember? Oh, that letter! It broke my heart. And now, when I come back to him with his money and happiness, bringing back all my love, he refuses me because it had cost him 120 pounds.
I haven't got it.
Rodolphe answered calmly, hiding his anger. She went. It was late evening. All was dark. She was, once again, hopeless. She soon arrived at the chemist's shop. It was empty. She was about to go in, but thought that someone might come. So she quietly entered through the side gate. Inside she saw Justin. "The key! Where is the—" she said.
What?
He stared at her. She looked more beautiful than ever before, the whiteness of her face against the darkness of the night. "I want the key to the cupboard. Give it to me," she told him.
I'll have to tell Monsieur Homais.
"No, stop. Don't bother him. I'll tell him myself." He took her to find the key to the room where the dangerous chemicals were stored. The key turned. She went straight over to the shelf with the pan on it. She did not forget. She grabbed the blue jar, opened it quickly, and began putting the white powder in her mouth.
Stop!
Justin cried. "Be quiet. They'll come. Don't say anything. Monsieur Homais will be to blame." And she went away, suddenly at peace. When she returned home, she calmly sat down at her desk and wrote a letter. Charles soon returned. She gave him the letter. "Read it tomorrow," she said. "Till then, please don't ask me any questions, not one."
But...
"No, leave me alone." She then lay down on the bed and closed her eyes, waiting to die. She felt nothing. "There's not much in dying," she thought. "I shall go to sleep, and it will all be over." Soon enough she began to vomit. He started questioning her. She didn't answer. She didn't move. She began to feel ice cold. "That's it. It's beginning," she whispered.
What did you say?
She said nothing. At 8 o'clock she began vomiting again. Charles noticed a white powder in the vomit.
That's strange.
He kept saying. "No, it's nothing," she said. Her skin turned ghostly white, and she began sweating as she lay still. She pretended to feel better and said she would soon get up. Then her body began to shake.
Tell me what you've eaten. Please answer.
Charles asked her, with tenderness in his eyes that she had never seen before. "All right," she said in a weak voice. "There, over there." He ran to the desk to read the letter.
What? Help? Oh, help! Poisoned! Poisoned!
Homais soon arrived. Charles sat down next to his wife and cried. "Don't cry," she said. "Soon I shall be troubling you no more."
Why did you? What made you?
"It had to be, my dear," she replied.
Weren't you happy? Is it my fault? I did all I could.
"Yes, that's true. You are a good man." And she passed her hand over his face tenderly. A bit later she told him to bring little Berthe. The little girl arrived, looking sleepy, after being woken up. "Oh, Mummy, what big eyes you've got! How pale you are! I'm frightened," said the girl, stepping away from her mother. Soon Dr. Canivet walked in. He looked over the patient and gave her some medicine to take, but it didn't seem to help. They waited. After some time, the great Dr. Larivière came in to see the patient. When he saw what medicine Canivet had given her, he became quite angry. When Canivet came for Hippolyte's operation, the doctor had showed nothing but confidence. Now, after the great Dr. Larivière scolded him, he sat in silence.
She's very bad, isn't she? I don't know. Oh, think of something. You have saved so many lives.
Charles asked the great doctor anxiously.
Come, my poor boy, be brave. There's nothing I can do.
And the great doctor turned away.
Are you going?
Charles asked.
I'm coming back.
He and Canivet then walked outside to the marketplace. Homais followed, looking at the great doctor with respect and wonder. He invited the two doctors to dine at his home.
How did she poison herself?
The great doctor asked.
I've no idea, doctor. Neither do I know where she could have found arsenic.
Homais told him. Justin began to shake with fear as he listened. The meal was over, and the great Dr. Larivière was about to leave, when Madame Homais requested that he examine her husband's health. Dr. Larivière seemed quite annoyed at this request. He returned to Bovary's house, together with Canivet. Emma looked about to die. She shook in her bed, looked pale as ever, and couldn't speak a word. The priest had come to be with her before her death, and all was silent. Charles remembered when she had been ill for many months, and the good priest had come to cure her.
There still may be hope,
he thought. Suddenly they heard a man walking past the house, singing as he went.
When the sun shines warm above, it turns a young woman's thoughts to love.
Emma sat up, looking out the window. The blind man! She cried, and Emma started laughing. She fell back to her pillow and closed her eyes. She was no more. Chapter 9. When she died, Charles threw himself upon his wife, crying,
Goodbye, goodbye.
Homais and Canivet had to take him from the room.
I must be with her. She's my wife,
he said as he cried. Homais returned to his home to write an article for the local newspaper to explain Madame Bovary's death, in which he would say that she unfortunately had mistaken the poison, arsenic, for sugar while making cream. Homais returned to Bovary's once more. He found Charles sitting next to his wife's body.
Now,
said the chemist,
you must decide on a time for her funeral. What for? What funeral? Oh, no, no, I want to keep her.
The priest, Monsieur Bournisien, soon persuaded Charles that he must, indeed, have a funeral for his wife.
I want her to be buried in her wedding dress, with white shoes, and her hair on her shoulders. 3 coffins, 1 oak, 1 mahogany, and 1 metal. If no one speaks to me at the funeral, I shall be all right. These are my wishes.
The priest and the chemist were both amazed at Charles's romanticism, and quickly reminded him of the cost.
Leave me. You never loved her. Get out.
Charles screamed at the chemist. The priest took him by the arm, explaining that God was very great and very good. We should be thankful to him.
I hate your God,
Charles exclaimed. The next day the priest and the chemist arrived to see Charles. The 2 men talked alone, waiting for Charles to get ready for the day. The priest said there was nothing to do but pray for her soul.
My dear sir,
said Homais,
you can't have it both ways. Either she died in grace, as the Church says, and she does not need our prayers, or she died without repenting her sins and will never rise to heaven.
The priest simply said they must pray for her.
But
the chemist told him,
why should we pray if God already knows our needs? What?
cried the priest. Charles entered and walked up to the bed, looking at his wife's body.
Come, my friend,
said the chemist.
You have been here long enough. This is a terrible sight for you.
Once Charles had left, the priest and the chemist continued their religious debate. They were growing angry. Bournisien was shocked by such rudeness. Homais was amazed at such stupidity, and they were beginning to insult each other, when suddenly Charles reappeared to sit next to his wife's body. In the early morning his mother arrived. Charles began to cry. She tried to discuss the expenses of the funeral, as the chemist had, but he became angry. Charles remained alone all afternoon. Berthe was taken to Madame Homais'. In the evening some visitors came. He stood up to shake hands with them without speaking. Everyone was bored, but no one would be the first to leave. The chemist brought a jar of medicinal water to clean the air, while the priest sprinkled holy water, blessed by the church, to keep good spirits in the house. Both men were still quite bitter about the other's ridiculous opinions on life and religion. Late in the evening, Charles returned again to Emma's bed, to say good-bye one last time. As he looked into her pale face, he remembered the walks around the garden together, the yard at Les Bertaux. He heard her laughter, the smell of her hair, holding her around the waist to kiss her cheek gently. The coffin with Madame Bovary's body was brought outside. The people of Yonville were waiting outside to watch. Old Rouault arrived and fainted at the sight of the coffin. Chapter 10. At first reading the letter that Homais had sent him, old Rouault had fallen to the floor in shock. Then he read the letter again and thought she wasn't dead, but yet she might be. Finally he got his things ready and left for Yonville. He told himself along the way that she would certainly live. Of course the doctors could save her. He arrived, and his first sight was of the coffin.
My girl, my Emma, my child, how did it— I don't know,
answered Charles as he cried. Charles tried to imagine that she had gone away, gone long ago, on a distant journey, and that they would meet again. But then he remembered that her body was being carried away, to be placed in the ground below, and he was filled with sadness.
Do you remember me coming to Tosties once when you had lost your first wife? I comforted you then. I found something to say then, but now—
Monsieur Rouault told his son-in-law through tears.
There's nothing left for me now, my boy. I've seen my wife go, and now today it's my daughter.
He told Charles he couldn't sleep in that house, and left for Les Bertaux immediately. He even refused to see his granddaughter.
It had upset me too much, but give her a big kiss for me,
he said as he left. Charles and his mother stayed up very late talking. They decided that she would come to live at Yonville to take care of the house, and they would never part again. She was secretly delighted. Charles could not sleep, thinking only of her. Rodolphe slept peacefully that night. Far away, Léon was sleeping too. There was one other who was still awake that night. Poor Justin was kneeling on Madame Bovary's grave, shaking as he cried. Chapter 11. The next day, Berthe asked for her mummy. They told her she had gone away and would be bringing her back some toys. Berthe spoke of her several times more, and then gradually stopped thinking about her. Money troubles soon began again for Charles. Leroux was always coming by the house to demand payments. Charles refused to sell her possessions. This annoyed his mother. However, Charles was not concerned with his mother's feelings. He had changed. Then Mademoiselle Lempereur arrived one day, after hearing of Madame Bovary's death. She requested payment for 3 months' lessons, though Emma had never had a single one. She had simply made an agreement with Mademoiselle Lempereur to write out the receipts for her husband. The library demanded 3 years' payment. As each bill was paid, Charles was certain it was the last, but new bills continued to arrive. The maid, Félicité, had recently run off to marry Monsieur Guillaumin's son, Theodore, and took Madame Bovary's dresses along. About the same time came news that Monsieur Léon Dupuis was soon to marry Mademoiselle Léocadie of Bondeville.
How pleased my poor wife would have been,
Charles wrote in a letter to Monsieur Léon. One day he was walking about the house and went up to the attic, where he found Emma's love letters from Rodolphe. He could not bear to read them. How could anyone not fall in love with her? He thought to himself. No one came to see them now. Justin ran away to Rouen, and the chemist's children no longer played with poor Berthe, as the little girl's social position was now well below theirs. Bovary was quite careful with his money, and paid off a number of bills, but still had several bills yet to pay. He asked his mother to sell her property, as she was now living in Yonville with him. She agreed, but said Charles must give her one of Emma's shawls in return. He refused to give it to her, and they quarreled. She suggested that she take the child to live with her. Charles agreed, but when the moment came, he could not part with the girl. Mother Bovary left. One morning, Charles finally decided to open Emma's secret drawer in her writing desk. All Léon's letters were there. He read through each one carefully, crying as he did. As he looked through, he also found a portrait of Rodolphe, staring back at him. He refused to go out, even to see his patients. He wept aloud all day and night, as he walked through the house. One day, Charles was forced to sell his horse, and went over to the market, and there he met Rodolphe. After the immediate shock of meeting was over, Rodolphe invited Charles to take a bottle of beer with him. As they drank together, Charles envied him. She had loved Rodolphe. Charles was not listening to Rodolphe talk. Rodolphe, in terror, stopped speaking, as Charles looked at him with hateful anger.
I'm not angry with you,
Charles told him, after a moment. Rodolphe sat in silence.
No, I'm not angry with you any more. No one is to blame,
he whispered to himself. The next day Charles went to sit in the garden. At 7 o'clock, Berthe, who had not seen him all the afternoon, came to fetch him in to dinner. "Come on, Daddy," she said. He fell to the ground. He was dead. When all the Bovary possessions were sold, and the bills paid, there was only 12 francs left, which paid for Mademoiselle Bovary's journey to her grandmother's. That good lady died within the year, and the little girl was then taken to an aunt. Old Rouault could no longer walk on his own. The aunt was poor, and sent her to a factory to work. Since Bovary's death, 3 doctors have since come to Yonville, and each has left. Upon each one coming, Homais, of course, shows them nothing but neighborly care and generosity. Homais has found success in his business and has begun writing books on medicine, as well as working in his laboratory.